With apologies for absence, we have apologies from Ken Bremner, Foundation Trust Partner Member, and Hilary Lloyd, our Chief Nurse. And we have, just to announce that later on the agenda, Dame Leslie Regan, who is the National Czar for Women's Health, is attending to talk here a bit about our work, but also to talk about the work that she's doing nationally. And during the course of the meeting, she has been in our women's health sites in Gateshead and Sunderland South Tyneside. So she'll come with some knowledge of what we're doing and be able to have a helpful discussion, I hope, on the context of the work in a national frame, as well as the things that we're doing locally. And then there are a number of farewells from the board to note, and Kelly Angus, our Chief People Officer, has moved on to another post. She's not here today, but I'm going to send her on behalf of the board our thanks for the work that she did for us, and also our best wishes for the future. But present is Dave Gallagher, our Chief Contracting and Procurement Officer, and Dave has been an executive member of the board since its foundation, and then before that he was extremely helpful both to me personally, but to the board as it was forming in setting up the arrangements for an integrated care board, an integrated care partnership, an integrated health care system, which was then confirmed in legislation that let us start properly in July of 2022. And Dave was, as I say, a core member of the group that worked with me to plan these changes before anyone else arrived, and also particularly in ensuring that all of the partners, including particularly the local authorities and the foundation trusts in the Tees Valley, were properly integrated into the work that we're doing. And Dave has been working in the NHS for more than 40 years, so it isn't just a retirement from his work here, but a retirement from a very, very distinguished career in the NHS and as a public servant to this country. So we'd like to thank you for everything you've done, Dave, both historically before you joined us, but also in particular the work you've done on the board. We wish you well for your future and look forward to keeping in contact in the years ahead. We have declarations of interest, of course, of all of us are recorded on the public record, and we have no additional ones to raise for today's business unless anybody around the table wants to draw attention to anything. Can I check with our board secretary that we're quorate to continue, which we are. And then we've two sets of minutes to prove the accuracy. One, a meeting of this board held on the 27th of January 2026, and then an extraordinary meeting that we held on the 12th of February 2026. Both of those sets of minutes are now in the public papers. Are there any points of accuracy that anyone wants to pick up? And then our action log, which is the way that we check on progress of things that we've agreed at the meetings, is in the papers. Are there anything that one wanted to comment on or ask any questions about from the action log? No, thank you. And then just before we start on the agenda, to take account of any items of other business that anyone wanted to add to the existing agenda. And I don't see any indication of that, so we can start with the first substantive item, which is the Chief Executive's report, and Sam Allen, our Chief Executive, is going to give that.
Thank you very much, Salim. Good morning, colleagues. So quite a detailed report this month, and you'll see that I start the report by covering our significant change programme that we've had underway as we move towards becoming a strategic commissioner. You'll know that obviously all of the integrated care boards in England have been on this journey over the past year, and it has been a really considerable period of change for us. I first of all just want to echo Liam's fine words for Dave. You've been a fantastic colleague, but I also want to recognise the over 100 colleagues who are leaving the ICB today and over the next few days, who have been taking this moment to exit the organisation, predominantly through voluntary redundancy. You'll know that we've had to reduce our running costs by 30%, and that means as we move forward with this new role, operating with a much more slimmed down organisation. Our real primary purpose moving forward into the future, and we'll start the new organisation on the 4th of May, is to act as strategic commissioners, and essentially we'll be the main NHS payer for services across our region. We'll have to operate a very structured commissioning cycle, understanding population need, ensuring that plans are developed aligned to the 3 key shifts the government has set out in the 10-year plan, and allocate our resources to deliver maximum benefit for our population, and at a time that will require us to make challenging decisions and difficult decisions, particularly given the funding that we have available, and indeed future financial settlements for the NHS. And of course all of this needs to be underpinned by the best possible data. I think it is a time of change for the organisation, but I do think we, over the weeks ahead, will start to build more optimism as we make this step into our new role as a strategic commissioner. I also, Chair, want to thank our partners, particularly our local authority partners, our NHS Trust, but also our community and voluntary sector. Colleagues have been incredibly patient with us over the past year as we've navigated these changes, but they've also all really stepped up to the plate. Change to us requires change for the whole system, and particularly our local authority partners and our local NHS trusts are stepping in to really pick up the mantle and drive place-based leadership. And for us in the North East North Cumbria, that will mean new neighbourhood health services. So I think over the year ahead we can start to see these plans emerge, but led by our partners locally. We'll be working with them, agreeing the outcomes and contracting for delivery, and using all of the levers that we've got as commissioners, as I said earlier, to really drive improvements for our population. I think a real key priority to support our colleagues with this transition, and it is quite a step change for us as commissioners, will be far more less hands-on, has been the development of an organisational development plan. I think commissioning isn't anything new. It has been in the NHS for a couple of decades, and some of us will have been around in the early noughties and 2000s when we saw the advent of world-class commissioning. And indeed, Dave, you would have seen a big chunk of that in your 40-plus year career in the NHS. Needless to say, we do have to brush up on some of our skills, though, and there will be a development programme to support our staff over the year ahead. I'd like to think that we've got a good head start. During the change process, we did take the decision to appoint our new Director of Population Health, and they've been a really great addition to the ICB as we form the new leadership team to take the organisation into the future. Operationally, board, it's also continued to be a busy period. I think, first of all, just to say, and we'll come on to the finance report later in the meeting, but we are confident we will deliver our 25-26 financial plan. We've had the benefit of our staff survey results that have supported us to shape our organisational development plan for the ICB. Really delighted that we achieved a really significant engagement score, and I think that's really speaks volumes for our transition team that have worked diligently to lead the transition to becoming a strategic commissioner. We've increased our engagement with staff. However, our staff survey results do highlight a number of areas that we do need to pay very close attention to, particularly around team working. We've had an incredibly high appraisal rate, but less successful in terms of how useful people have experienced those appraisals. And I think as we make this transition to being a strategic commissioner, building an organisation people can feel a sense of pride in, needless to say, having a period of stability will help. And we certainly look forward to that as we start to implement our strategic commissioning plan. There's been quite a significant national announcement this week, which has involved us as a region. So you may have noticed in the press the national announcement of 5 NHS trusts entering what's called an NHS Intensive Recovery Programme. And one of the 5 trusts in England is North Cumbria Integrated Care. This programme should give those 5 organisations, which are deemed to be the most challenged organisations in the English health system, greater oversight and support, support to deal with persistent challenges, and also to address key outcome measures such as access and other performance standards. I think it would be fair to say that North Cumbria has been a trust that has had persistent challenges over the last 2 decades. I think it's also an organisation that's been in a number of these regimes over years and has some quite systemic structural issues associated with delivering healthcare in a highly rural area, particularly around sustainability of things like workforce. We're very confident in the leadership of the Trust. One of the other expectations of this programme is to send veteran healthcare leaders into organisations. The current Chief Executive was sent in to that organisation several months ago from Gateshead, having done a good job at Gateshead for the last 2 years, and they're working diligently hard to build their leadership team at North Cumbria and are incredibly committed to I think the time that it's going to be required to support that organisation. This is not a quick fix. It's going to be a journey over the next 3 to 5 years. And the Trust also recently announced the appointment of a new Chief Executive, Dr. Stephen Singleton, who's a very experienced clinician that some colleagues may recall held very senior positions in the North East prior to this. So I think we're very optimistic about the organisation, but we know it's a trust that we will need to continue to work closely with and support. And my executive team and I are over in Cumbria on Tuesday for an executive to executive with the organisation, and we'll also be visiting services there and getting a greater sense of the type of support that we need to give them. My report also picks up and includes the Royal College of Radiologists review at County Durham and Darlington. This review was undertaken on the back of the previous Royal College review we've undertook at the Trust, which the board will be aware had a number of significant recommendations that we are again supporting County Durham and Darlington with. This particular report includes 30 recommendations to strengthen symptomatic breast imaging for the Trust and includes 16 high priority recommendations. It also includes 2 recommendations for us as the Commissioners, and we will continue to work with the Trust but also the NHS England regional team on the implementation of all of these recommendations. Work continues at the Trust, particularly in terms of the look back to understand harm caused to women who have gone through the breast services. And as a Commissioner, we continue to work with County Durham and Darlington, but also Newcastle Hospitals, Gateshead Health and North Tees on the commissioning of breast services. Just to stress again to the board, we are confident in the delivery of services at the Trust today, but we do have some mutual aid in place across other organisations supporting the Trust with this, and our Chief Medical Officer I'm sure will say a few words about the report as well. And then, Chair, I just want to finish with a few items. Firstly, general practice. I make mention in my report of work we have underway to support the Castlegate and Derwent general practice in Cockermouth over in Cumbria. That particular practice serves 18,500 residents. It's a large practice, and they're currently subject to enhanced scrutiny from the Care Quality Commission, as well as a number of additional commission services that we've put in place to support the practice. The issues which the CQC have shared with us are concerning. They are concerning, and we know that local residents are concerned about sustainability of that practice. And whilst we've immediately, as you would expect us, sought to bolster services going into that practice, we do continue to keep under very close review our contractual options in terms of ensuring the longer term sustainability of that practice, which also include safety considerations. And then just finally, Chair, just 2 points I want to mention quickly. Firstly, community pharmacy. So community pharmacy is an incredibly important part of our local health system. They undertake a range of services for our communities, and I know the public, we all rely on our community pharmacy in different ways. Particularly in terms of our Pharmacy First programme, which is serving as a really excellent alternative to general practice for access to antibiotics and other treatments, and also health screening. We are aware, and again this has been trailed in the media nationally, of the significant pressure that community pharmacy is under, and particularly independent community pharmacy. And indeed representations have been made to us as an ICB from some of our independent community pharmacies. Health and wellbeing boards and councils do regularly undertake pharmaceutical needs assessments, which we work with them to do, and you'll note in the report that I include details of where we've had closures of pharmacies, but also where we've had pharmacies open. Now, for the eagle-eyed of you will have noticed probably one thing. So we've had closures of community pharmacies. These would be pharmacies on the high street or out in the community. And we've had 7 closures, all community pharmacies. We have had 8 new pharmacies open, but 7 of those are distance pharmacies. So we are starting to see the impact of, albeit at relatively small scale at this point in time, the loss of community pharmacy on the high street. Now, distance pharmacies operate really excellent alternatives, and of course many members of the public will be very pleased with having their medications delivered to their houses as an alternative. But equally we also do know the very important role that independent pharmacy and other pharmacies on the high street have, and I think that's something from an ICB perspective, in our role as Strategic Commissioner, we're going to have to do some more work to look at what the sort of medium to long term plan of this, particularly if we see more closures of community pharmacies as a result of the cost pressures that they're experiencing in terms of being able to maintain their services. And then just finally, we've had a very significant piece of work underway over the past year on a locally commissioned service review of general practice. So we inherited a whole range of different commissioned services across the North East, North Cumbria. This has been a very significant piece of work. So we sought to sort of harmonise these services across our general practice. And you'll see that we've had 96% of our practices sign up to that. We've also been supporting our practices with the new national access targets, and all but one of our 335 general practices across the North East and North Cumbria are compliant with that, and we have a plan in place with a practice that's not compliant in order to get them to become compliant. And then actually this is the final point, Chair, I do want to make. I received a concern or a complaint from a member of the public in recent weeks regarding adult hearing provision in West Cumbria. Again, this very much links into historical commissioning arrangements, something called any qualified provider arrangements, which clinical commissioning groups, which we superseded, of which there were 8 across the North East and North Cumbria, each had any qualified provider arrangements. So what that means, for example, with audiologies, in some parts of the North East North Cumbria, as an NHS patient, you can access audiology services in your local Specsavers. That's a good experience. We get general good feedback on that in terms of access, but that option wasn't commissioned in Cumbria. So the pathway to access those services is through the NHS Trust. And understandably, this member of the public has raised that in terms of an equity of provision issue and an access issue, and has also asked me specifically to mention this in my board report, which I have done, and has asked a question of the board today, Chair, which I'm going to ask Dave, who leads in this particular area, to address. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So we've had a question from a member of the public from Cumbria. There are 3 parts to the question. I'll read them out and then I'll have the response to it, although Sam's picked a lot of it up. The first one is, why is there a disparity in patient choice, any qualified provider between the North East and West Cumbria? The second one is, what specific steps is the ICB taking to commission AQP services for Whitehaven residents in the 2026-27 contract cycle? And the last one, when will the minutes and the written response to this specific query be made available to the public? I think the answer to the last one is that actually the minutes of the meeting will be made available to the public in time for the next public board meeting. Sam's touched on the first 2 parts. Access to adult hearing loss isn't what we'd want across North East and North Cumbria. It's not as uniform as it should be, and there are a range of arrangements. The any qualified provider contract arrangement is actually something that's falling out of favour. It's not something we'd normally use. Our first attempt at this is to make sure that actually people have access to services, and it's variously through Foundation Trust or through high street providers, as Sam's described. We've had to put in place some renewed contracts in some parts of the North East North Cumbria because some people, particularly in County Durham, didn't have access without this arrangement. But there is a piece of work starting off this year which will actually look at making sure we've got a uniform access service across the whole of the North East and North Cumbria that will pick this up. So it won't be any qualified provider, but it will be something that will make sure that patients have choice of access. So hopefully that answers the questions.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you, Dave, for that response. Can we see if there are any questions or points that people want to make about the Chief Executive's report? Sir Pally Hungan, Non-Executive Director.
Thank you, Sam, for your report. I wondered what specific measures have been taken with regard to the general practice in the Cumbria area to, firstly, to ensure continuity of care, and secondly, to ensure quality and safety.
Thank you, Pally. Levi, would you want to pick that question up?
Yeah, thanks, Pally. There's a number of measures. As the report highlights, we've commissioned additional capacity, very much seen as supporting the practice to get into a period of stability rather than a sustained approach to this. Although the report references what we'd commissioned for 4 weeks, we've purchased it on a kind of hourly call-off, so it will continue through the remainder of April, including over the Easter period. We've continued to work with the CQC, who advised us last Friday, the 27th of March, that their report is now through their internal processes for their quality assurance before it will be submitted to the practice as part of their inspection process. The main behind-the-scenes work that we continue to do is reviewing the different contract options that are available. It's quite a technical process going through all of the GP contract guidance, and I must be very clear that As a responsible commissioner, whilst we should investigate these, we are by no means predetermining what any outcome may be as part of this work. So our GP contracting team are working with the patient safety team to collate our assessment of the options available, and we will continue to work both with the practice, the CQC and NHS England in that respect.
Thank you. Rajesh Nadkarni, Foundation Trust Partner Member.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. This question is about the radiology report in County Durham and Darlington. Probably Neil might have the answer to this. The report has high priority actions, but amongst them there are two critical themes about storing medical images and exposure to radiation. So have they been addressed as a matter of urgency?
Yes, thanks. So I was going to mention just a couple of key points on the Royal College of Radiology report, and those two items there really, it relates to their PACS system, which is the system that manages images and image transfer within a foundation trust. I'm pleased to report that the CDDFT are installing their new PACS system, I believe, this week. So that is on track, and that should address a lot of the issues, because a lot of the safety issues that were highlighted in the Royal College of Radiology report, including the potential unnecessary radiation, is because of the inability of clinicians to easily access previous images. So there were repeat images, and it was a manual process, and it sometimes led to instances where there was either wrong side breast sampling done, therefore repeat biopsies needed to be made. So we'll certainly continue to work with the Trust, and we monitor all the delivery of all of these actions through the Breast Oversight Group. But I'm pleased to say that the Trust are implementing the new PACS system, which I think will address a lot of the technical IT issues within the Trust. The report also, though, does, as if you recall, the previous Royal College of Surgeons report and the Aubrey report has also found issues with governance, clinical governance, culture, again, which we will pick up as part of the wider improvement work with the Trust.
Thank you. I don't see any other interventions requested on this item, so thank you to Sam Allen, our Chief Executive, for her. If we could now move on to the highlights of the board committees that have been meeting over the last couple of months, starting with the Executive Committee, which Sam Allen chairs.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper includes the minutes from our January, February and March meetings, each of which was quite a substantial agenda item. And there's just sort of three areas I would like to draw the board's attention to. So first of all, the service reform programme we've had underway, working jointly with our NHS trusts across our system, has been very significant. So, and it concludes today, actually, and it has met its goals that we set for the programme, and this was predominantly set up around helping us secure financial sustainability, and as part of delivery of our commissioning plan for 2025-26. The programme effectively has delivered just under £38 million worth of recurrent savings, and some longer term service changes, particularly around eye care and hearing services, as we've just heard, will continue beyond this period of time as part of our work as a strategic commissioner. We received new guidance recently around special educational needs, and we discussed those new national plans to improve support for children and young people with those particular needs in our population, and this requires very close working with our local authorities, schools and other partners, particularly around early support provision, service planning and staffing. We had a particular conversation about those in light of a new requirement, particularly around investing in joint delivery plans at the local authority footprint, particularly given we're obviously going to be a much smaller organisation, but I'm very pleased our chief nurse will be leading on that, and through our safeguarding and send partnerships, working closely with the local authority. And then just finally, an area of work that we've kept under close review through our emergency planning resilience framework and assurance approach has been the recommendations that came out of the Manchester arena inquiry. There was a whole number of recommendations in there for statutory services, including health, but also our other blue light partners as well. Quite clearly, we've been working to make sure that we've got good resilience in our system, and of course the Integrated Care Board will continue to be the Category 1 responder, so we've got statutory duties to coordinate all of that. So we received a further report updating us on that, and I think we're content that with the exception of a couple of areas which we just continue to embed, the vast majority of those actions have been addressed locally, the ones that are within our control, and obviously we're continuing to work with NHS England in terms of what's within their gift. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Any points anyone wants to raise on the work of the Executive Committee? Thank you. And we move on now to the Quality and Safety Committee, which is Sir Pally Huggins, the chair of that committee.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've highlighted 3 items there. I should mention that we've had a number of meetings, and the last one was on the 12th of March, the minutes of which are, the report from which is in the papers. The 3 points I want to highlight are firstly a patient story, which revolves around a child who had physical and speech tics. As you can see from my notes there, this highlighted a problem in terms of reaching an accurate diagnosis, also in terms of deciding which was the most appropriate specialty, and the amount of time it took to decide what ought to be done. Although this appears to be somewhat unusual in the sense that it isn't a regular long-term chronic problem such as, say, a respiratory disease, these kind of instances are fairly common in general practice. I'm pleased that the ICB is now working on a more appropriate pathway for people with such problems. There are difficulties in deciding, for example, whether such young people should be referred to mental health or to neurology, and there are a number of decisions to be made here. I hope that within the next few months we will have clarity in terms of this situation. Our hearts went out to the parents of this child, and obviously to the child. It's a very difficult situation when it arises, but I do want to indicate that we are very much person-centered in our committee in terms of quality and safety, and stories like this have an important bearing on the way we work. Secondly, just to bring you up to speed, the complaints procedure, which admittedly has been lagging somewhat in the last couple of years, has improved enormously. We have a large number of complaints which the ICB receives, both from the secondary care, in relation to secondary care and primary care and other aspects of the care that we provide, and that things are a lot better in terms of timescales, and we hope that by the end of the year we will have caught up altogether. The third item there is something, with your permission, I just want to spend a few moments on. We're all aware that in the last couple of years, we've become increasingly used to what we call corridor care. This is when patients are treated in unconventional settings. This has been reassigned as a new it's been given a new title, patient care in temporary environments. That's the new term being used. And there was a recent report which we received and discussed, and this report was released by the Health Services Safety Investigations Body. And this report describes what's been happening in the last couple of years, the pressures on our services, and the various problems that arise as a consequence of what you and I might call corridor care. Now, not all corridor care is negative. You might argue that it's a great deal better for someone to be provided with a comfortable bed as opposed to being in a chair in an inappropriate environment. But what is recognized is that this is now becoming regular all the way through the year. It's no longer a winter season problem. And I think it's important to remember that. The report was based on an anonymized survey of a number of trusts up and down the country. And we're not sure whether we ourselves were involved in this or if any of our trusts contributed to the information. But the findings clearly indicate that this is something that we might have to get used to in the long run. I'm not saying that the report is normalizing such care, but there was a certain air of defeatism in the sense that it thought that things would be like this for a very long time to come. There are a number of problems, of course, associated with this, a number of key risks which are associated with what you and I might call corridor care, and I think we need to be aware of these risks. You know, data collection about patient cohorts is compromised, particularly in terms of length of stays, incidents, and outcomes, which are harder to define because many such patients are in settings which are not easily necessarily measurable in the usual sense. There may be inadequate incident reporting and response mechanisms, problems with clear patient communication, a failure to engage regularly with patients in temporary care environments, possibly also a loss of continuity in terms of who's going to be looking after them and who is responsible. And I've mentioned the possibility of increased infection control difficulties. And of course, most importantly, insufficient staff training and awareness regarding temporary care environments and the possibility of suboptimal care and increased safety risks. These are all highlighted in this HSSIB report. The reason I'm speaking specifically to this item is that I feel that as an ICB, we ought to respond to this. There is no particular list of recommendations in the HSIB report. It is essentially a descriptive report, but I think it would be helpful for us to not just to become aware of this, which we are, of course, aware of, but to become aware of the possibility that we may need to have a more planned approach to patients in such settings. And as chair of the Quality and Safety Committee, this is an area which I feel we need to stress. I'm sure that there'll be colleagues who have
thank you. Just for those who've seen the HSSIB is the Health Service Safety Investigation Body. Do we know, Pally, or maybe this is one for Jacqueline, do we know how much corridor care there is in the area covered by the ICB, given that this particular national report doesn't comment region by region?
Chair, I think the short answer is no, we don't have a fully accurate picture because there is no national metric for counting it consistently. We do have some intelligence and information shared through our Strategic Coordination Centre, and it's something that we do discuss on a daily basis and address when there are pressures. I believe there's some work in development nationally as we speak to land a more consistent and structured way of counting corridor care, as well as frameworks for formalising some of the work that we already do informally around escalating and seeking to resolve issues where we're seeing significant corridor care. So we await that, but as I say, ahead of that, we are doing quite proactive work through our Strategic Coordination Centre.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Any other comments or questions for Pally? No, thank you for your report. And over to David Stout, Chair of the Audit Committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. There's 5 items of there. First one's information governance. The committee reviews the information governance report, and we were happy with the report which for the last quarter, well, for quarter 3 within this financial year. The committee gets extra assurance because a lot of that work is audited by internal audit, so that provides an independent assurance to the committee, as well as the assurance that we get from the people who attend the committee to answer questions. Financial performance, ICB and the ICS, we are happy with that, and there's a report on the agenda today which covers that. Internal audit, good position. When internal audits are carried out, there's a list of management actions that need to be list of actions that need to be actioned, and we reached a position at the last committee whereby there were no outstanding actions required from management. And bearing in mind everything else that's going on, that's a really good position to be in. We're right up to date on management actions. Around internal audit, going forward, we just need to be mindful of a few risks. As people leave the organisation, as new systems may be set up to do things in a different way because we've got 30% less staff than we had before, then that can bring some risks. And actually carrying out the internal audits can be problematic if we've got less staff and those staff are still in the process of setting up systems. So we're all right at the moment. We just need to be mindful of that as we go through the year. Just watch that we can carry out the number of internal audits that we need to carry out adequately. But that's fine on internal audit so far. On the annual review of internal and external audit effectiveness, we've reviewed internal audit effectiveness over the last year by getting feedback from managers, and they were very complimentary about the service that they received from internal audit. So that's fine. And the chair of the audit committee have written back to internal audit and told them that we're very happy. Only one area where we can make some improvement out of the many areas that are covered. And then the last one is freedom to speak up. We've got a new local guardian in place, and she attended the last committee and reported on what she was doing. We're very happy with that. She only is employed part-time, but is covering the ground very adequately. Very happy with that. And in fact, is for the first time, is now providing some input into primary care, which is colossal. And she needs to be very careful that she doesn't get immersed in the detail there, but she's well aware of that and is just providing support via networks, etc., to help primary care make certain they've got adequate foot-sew arrangements in place. So that's what we covered at the last Audit Committee, Chairman.
Thank you, David. Sam, just a brief word on this, because you've had some experience of it. I mean, this freedom to speak up guardian role was introduced some years ago now, but as a concern that whistleblowers didn't have, their voices weren't heard. Has it been working well as a system, and what's your impression of it?
I think it's variable. It would probably be fair to say, and in the recent set of structural changes, obviously the national freedom to speak up guardian role is removed. However, we will continue to have freedom to speak up guardians, and I think it's something we value deeply, actually. Mm-hmm. And we do have many examples and experiences where, for whatever reason, individuals have felt safer or more able to speak up to a guardian who is there to not respond to the issues, but listen to them and direct them to the appropriate mechanisms. I think it was initially set up very specifically to address issues of patient safety. I think, though, our Freedom to Speak Up guardians also pick up issues around personnel concerns, particularly around team dynamics and relationships. And of course, at times, some of these things can have an impact on patient safety. So I think it's something we will continue to invest in. It'll be an important part of our internal organisation. My slight reservations, though, and I would echo David's concerns, will be primary care. You know, with 335 practices, many of these are effectively individual businesses. We have no jurisdiction essentially over that, with the exception of the outcomes and the contractual standards we commission against. So that could, our guardian could be consumed in this. So I think we probably just need to think through a little bit more around how we support speaking up when it comes to primary care, which general practice is one part of it. We also have community pharmacies, dentists, and optometrists as well. So I think we need to probably think a bit more clearly about our strategy on that. But our priority needs to be within the organisation.
Thank you. Are there any other points anyone wants to raise on the work of the Audit Committee? No. Well, thank you for your report, David. We're now moving on to the Integrated Delivery Report, which Jacqueline Myers, Chief Strategy Officer, will give, and this is the occasion when we review progress against targets and performance expectations.
Thank you, Chair. In the board paper pack, you have the February Integrated Delivery Report, which is the data nationally published in February, covering variously December and January. As I go along, I will also give a little bit of an update, because since the pack was put together, we have had the March data published as well. So starting with urgent emergency care, at the top of the report there, you'll see that in January, on the headline for our standard and A&E departments, we were behind plan, delivering a performance of 74.9%. I'm pleased to report that we have seen an improvement in February and indeed in March. Nationally, you remember the ask was at least a 78% performance for the month end. That's the period that's going to be measured and we're going to be judged on in terms of success. Obviously, it's the last day of March today, so bearing anything significant occurring, we are confident that we will see a performance well in excess of 78% and pretty close to our plan, so around the 80% mark. So it's recovered strongly after some challenges over the winter months. In terms of our ambulance response times, it's still an extremely strong performance from our main provider, NIAS, who we are the lead commissioner for. Their Category 2 performance, those are the second most urgent responses that cover about 70% of all our ambulance journeys. Again, better than plan, so a long run of that. And although not covered in the report, North East Ambulance Service is the only ambulance service in the country that's managed to deliver the Category 1 national standard for 3 months in a row. So a really strong performance there, we're pleased to see. Moving to planned care and looking at the headline referral to treatment 18-week standard, we are still seeing an improving position, as we have been doing across the year there, but still trailing our own plan. So in the data in the report, we were in fact 2.2% off our plan, delivering a 70% performance in terms of the number of people waiting under 18 weeks. Still benchmarks very strong nationally, but is putting us in a difficult position to deliver the 5% improvement on our opening waiting times performance at the beginning of the year, which was the national ask. So there is a lot of work going on locally in response to some national initiatives, so-called sprints, where additional funding has been made available to do extra elective work to try and catch up any trailing performance, and that's happening in 6 out of 8 of our acute trusts right now, so we hope that will have a positive impact, but we're concerned as to whether we'll actually deliver our full plan there in the year end. Similarly, for the very longest wait is over 1 year or 52 weeks as they're styled, we are still seeing an improving position, so reducing percentage of our waiting list waiting over a year. And we may well deliver the national ask of no more than 1% of our active waiting list being over 52 weeks. We set ourselves a stretch target of going beyond that, and it's looking unlikely that we will deliver our own stretch plan. Perhaps one of the most concerning metrics in the report right now is the faster diagnosis standard. This is the standard that anyone referred as an urgent suspected cancer gets a diagnosis within 28 days. This is really under significant pressure, and I can tell you that beyond the data that's in the report pack, it has worsened again in January, down to 66.7% when the ask is 80%. There's a huge amount of work going on in relation to this with our providers through the so-called tiering meetings, where we meet trusts along with our regional colleagues where they're not delivering their plan. We do know that there are some confounding factors in there, particularly around the movement of breast cases around the system in order to relieve pressure on County Durham Hospital while they deliver their recovery plan. Nonetheless, this is concerning and something that we'll give a lot of focus to in coming months. In relation to dental, although we've apprised the board of this previously, just to remind you that whilst we are flagging as behind our plan in some of the other more recently introduced metrics, such as the requirement to make a specific contribution to the national commitment to increase dental appointments by 700,000, we are on track to deliver that. And we're also on track to deliver our plan to roll out additional emergency appointments through our urgent dental access systems. And there's more information on that in the body of the report. Moving down the report, just want to flag that there is a concerning position in terms of the number of our patients who either have learning disabilities and or autism who are currently, unfortunately, finding themselves in an inpatient bed. You'll see on the report there that we have 40 more patients currently residing in inpatient beds at the time of the report compared to the improvement trajectory we'd set ourselves, and unfortunately in February that worsened by a further 2. There is a huge amount of work going on in relation to this around individual case management, working with our partners in local authorities and looking to expand capacity to create suitable community support for people. But there's clearly much more to do, and so that's going to be also a continued area of intense focus as we go forward. In terms of community waiting times, it's disappointing to see that they are still running significantly ahead of our plan. I know the board's surprised at this because we did a deep dive, but just to remind you, there are a couple of confounding factors here, most notably that we have a large national provider headquartered in the North East, majority of whose patients are not commissioned by us, the ICB, and are not living in the North East, but they do count in our numbers in the way things currently are measured, and it's quite difficult for us to impact that. But underneath this we are seeing some progress on reducing local community waits, and it's noted in the report that there's also some data quality issues emerged in North Cumbria which they're grappling with, and we expect to give a more clear view of the impact of those in next month's report. Lastly, I just wanted to comment on talking therapies, where you can see we're still struggling to get to our plan in terms of particularly reliable recovery, although reliable improvement is running, it's bobbing along but not sustainably being delivered. So again, a lot of work being done currently by our team looking at our talking therapies provision. There's a big national push to expand capacity so that more of our patients can benefit, and obviously it's really important as we do expand capacity that we maintain or improve the efficacy of the services we commission, so very focused on that, but further work to do to make sure that people are getting the benefit of these services. And indeed in the 3-year plan there is an expectation that we go beyond these current levels and seeing a further improvement in the number of patients who achieve reliable recovery or reliable improvement on the back of accessing talking therapies. It was already mentioned earlier in the meeting, but the last metric I wanted to flag was the sickness metric at the end of the report there, which you can see is really running significantly beyond our plans, and it's going to have to be a real area of focus for our providers in the coming year. Obviously sickness has a major impact on service delivery and obviously on the well-being of our staff, so I know there are plans that the Chief People Officers are working on together to address this, but that also will need further focus in the coming year. And that's all the highlights and lowlights. I wanted to draw attention to, Chair, but as ever happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Are there any comments or questions on Jacqueline's report or on the papers that you've received? Sir Pally Hungin.
Yeah. Just to highlight something that frequently gets overlooked because we tend to concentrate so much on our trusts, but the data indicate that the monthly appointments in general practice per working day are 80,000 plus, which is an incredible amount of throughput as far as health is concerned. And it's a statistic that I think we ought to take into consideration when evaluating demand upon our secondary care services as well.
If there are no other comments, we move on to the finance report. This is a time of year when it's normally very, very difficult to find a finance officer because they're all in the process of closing the books on the financial year. So no doubt you're going to tell us how we've done in the current financial year, which is nearly at an end, and then prospects for next year.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I'm very conscious today is the 31st of March, so I'm sure we'll all welcome in the new financial year at midnight with great celebration. The report itself in front of you is the month 10 report, but obviously I'll touch on the year-end position and where I believe the ICB and the ICS will end, given that we're at 31st of March today. I'll touch on first the ICS duty to achieve break-even on the revenue position or the revenue budget. So at month 10, we are ahead of plan. The actual reported deficit at month 10 is just less than £12 million, and that's reduced significantly the deficit that we've got from where we were at month 6, which was around £26 million. So you can see the trajectory is positive in terms of direction, and I fully expect us to be recovered to a balanced position at year end as an ICS. Following discussions and agreements at the board in January and following the NHS England forecast overspend protocol, one organisation in our patch did deteriorate its forecast position by £24 million at month 10. That was agreed by both the ICB and NHS England, and we were able to offset that by improvements in other organisations. That included NIAS, but it also included the ICB. The ICB improving its position by £23 million in terms of forecast outturn. And what that basically did was left the ICS in a stable position in terms of forecast outturn, but it also protected £50 million of support funding coming into the ICS, which we would lose effectively if we weren't able to deliver a plan as a system. I think it's important to touch on efficiency. Following the change on County Durham Foundation Trust forecast, there has been a significant deterioration in delivery of recurrent efficiencies that we're forecasting to the end of the year. The position on that now is £84 million shortfall. And whilst those are being offset by non-recurrent savings, it obviously makes the position more difficult to deliver balanced plans in the year ahead. The level of risk across the ICS does continue to reduce. You'll see in the report that I report that the position now is down to £22 million at month 10. So basically at that point in time, we still had £22 million of risks that might materialise between now and the end of the year. At month 11, that reduced further to £11 million. And again, I'm confident that risks that may materialise between now and the end of the year at ICS level can be managed. And we've reported that to NHS England. So in a nutshell, from an ICS point of view, we're on track to achieve our overall plan, but the recurrent efficiencies, especially around workforce, haven't always been delivered, and that will make next year all the more challenging, especially for those providers that have not seen workforce reductions in their plan. I'll touch on the ICB duty to break even now, Chair, that's okay. As I've just mentioned before, the ICB surplus has increased by £23 million. And they include things such as receipt of additional non-recurrent funding and flexibilities from NHS England, the pausing of investments, discretionary spend controls and demand management across a number of activity areas that we manage. We do have a few areas of pressure that remain between now and the end of the year. We have seen significant growth in ADHD and autism assessments. We manage that via our contracting team and agree indicative activity plans and manage that with providers. All age continuing care, whilst it has delivered its efficiency plan this year, we have seen growth over and above the plan that we set, approximately £10 million between now and the end of the year. And prescribing is in a similar situation. We've delivered the prescribing efficiency plan, but the cost of drugs and the number that we're using are slightly higher than what we anticipated at the start of the year, and we include an £8 million forecast between now at end of year. Those two pressures on all age continuing care prescribing we pick up as part of the financial plan, which I'll talk about later. So we do have some financial risk in the ICB, but it's minimal and we can mitigate that. So I'm confident that the ICB will deliver its target at the end of the year as well. Just talking about financial risk, Chair, I think it is important maybe we should take the opportunity to remind us all that we went into the year as an ICS with financial risk of £244 million. It was certainly the highest that I'd ever seen us do, or any other organisation or patch in the country, quite frankly. And we are a big organisation, a big system, but nevertheless, to be able to sit here today and say to you, we are one of a number of systems that are able to deliver our plan this year. Not every system can say that. I think is really good news from a financial perspective. The other two duties of the ICB from a financial basis, Chair, capital and running costs, they both remain on track to deliver as reported last time. And that's all I need to. I'll ask my report and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Just before we do, David, I'd like to thank you for your leadership of this process. And as you say, it's a hugely complex, in very constrained financial times with a very large degree of turbulence, and the work of leadership that you've done and the great skilled work of your team, and indeed the teams in the foundation trusts and the other organisations we work with. But you described it in a very calm and rational way, and I know that it hasn't been anything but calm and rational at times, but congratulations on being able to do it. It is, after all, public money, and we want to ensure that it does the best good it possibly can, whilst not overspending, which is a very bad thing to do. Thank you. So questions, David Stout.
Thanks very much, Chairman. You got in just ahead of me, so can I just add my appreciation and thanks to you, David, for yourself, your staff and the executive team, because as you say, £250 million in risk at the beginning of the year, and then landing it despite the little hiccups during the year is no mean feat to deliver that. So thank you for that. I've only got one question. You mentioned in the report that you're still maintaining the systems around financial recovery across the ICS. And I just want to check that that is the intention going forward, because of course that was entirely appropriate when we were a region. We're no longer a region, but it might still be entirely appropriate for all I know. Can I interpret from this that it is our intention to continue that for a while, and that the providers across the ICS are very happy with that and would wish that to happen?
So to answer your question, David, in terms of basically working together to identify efficiency opportunities or improve productivity. So there are some things that the ICB will clearly lead and continue on. We planned on that basis, and I'll touch that on the financial plan. There are other areas where workforce or elective or productivity, I fully expect the provider collaborative may need to take the lead in those areas. So organisations will still work together. They may work together in their sub-footprints, and the Alliance is a good example of that across the north of the patch. So it will continue, because the people in place, and especially the provider collaborative are still in place, but it will still feel different and will have a lesser role in terms of leadership. But it's very much I feel that next year will be very much a transition year, and we're finding our feet in terms of how things will work in reality. And of course, we'll take any role that makes sense from from what region asks us to do in terms of support, and what's right for patient care as well. But it will feel different in terms of responsibilities.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. That seems very sensible. Thank you very much, Dave. Okay.
Thank you. Elisa Taylor, voluntary sector and community representative.
Thank you. David, I was wondering if you had any idea of the potential impact of the cost reductions on the voluntary sector at all?
Yeah, I can touch on that if that's okay, Lisa. And we've obviously got efficiencies in the plan, which is on the next paper as well. So, as we were talking before about, one of our key duties as an ICB is to ensure value for money. And so, whenever we're looking at efficiencies as an ICB, we're looking very much through the lens of what services we currently have provide the biggest impact and are the most important to patients. And quite often, voluntary services offer extremely good value for money, as I'm sure you would advocate. In terms of efficiencies in 25, 26 and 26, 27, to my best of knowledge, I don't think we've made massive differences in the voluntary sector in terms of cuts and reductions. There will have been some, but hopefully not to the scale that people were anticipating. What we've generally been doing over the last year or two is maybe not investing in things that we would have liked to invested in. So a good example would be where we had greater flexibility around service development funding. We may have decided not to invest some of that money rather than cut another service, if that makes sense. So hopefully that answers your question in general terms.
Thank you. I think that concludes that item. Again, thank you very much for the presentation, David, and the work behind it. We're moving on now to item 12, which is the North East and North Cumbria's medium-term planning submissions, and I'm going to have contributions from Jacqueline Myers, David Chandler and Michelle Evans on this one. And David, you might just, because it sounds a bit of a technical item for those who are online, just explain where this piece of work fits into our programme of work.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Chair. So I'll lead off the report and I'm going to hand over to colleagues. So the report itself is a requirement by NHS England for us to produce a 3-year financial and operational plan. And that is very much this year an ICB financial plan, but it's a wider plan when you look at other aspects of the report. So this is very much fitting in with the changing framework that NHS England have got for ICBs and regions. So it's very important that we start the year with a clear operational plan that has been agreed by NHS England, and we are required to submit those plans at regular stages before we get to a final approved plan, ideally by 1st of April. So the plan itself has come to the Extraordinary Board on the 12th of February. That was in line with NHS England planning submission deadlines and was approved there. The paper itself is here today because there's an opportunity for update, giving feedback from NHS England, but also to seek final ratification of the 3-year plan and approval of the budgets for 26-27 as well. In terms of the financial part of the plan, it's been in development since early November, and I have, of course, worked very closely with both the Finance Committee and the Board in previous meetings to develop the final plan as presented today. Because it's been to Board previously and it's been through Finance Committee, I will just touch on a few key points that I'd like the Board to be aware of. So the first one is those changes. There's been a number of changes to NHS finance business rules, and I've set them out in the paper. And the main one is that the ICB is no longer directly responsible for ICS financial plans. And for members of the public, what that means is the ICB used to be responsible for Foundation Trust financial performance as well as the ICB. And going forward, we are not. We are responsible for the ICB and we're not responsible for FT Foundation Trust performance. That's not saying we won't have a role to play working with Region on that one, but the rules have basically changed in that respect. We've also received significant guidance around movement away from block contracts for acute services and move back to a more activity-based contract approach. And we've agreed a process to implement that over 3 years with our providers. NHS England have issued 3-year allocations to ICBs now. So that enables us to do short-term and medium-term planning. In terms of that funding, you'll see in the report that the ICB has a budget to commission healthcare services, and our scope of that is gradually increased year on year. So our budget is just under £9.5 billion in 26-27, and it rises to £10 billion by 28-29. That growth in funding is approximately 2.7% per annum. If you assume inflation is at 1.7%, because I think that was the factor that the Treasury used at the time of setting financial envelopes for the years ahead, that means real terms growth was set at around 1% for ICBs. And that's not the largest number in the world. It's good news. It's real terms growth. It's just not the scale that we would obviously ideally have to improve services. The ICB plan itself allocates the growth that we've had, that 2.7, to services and providers, using the national application workings that were issued to all providers in the ICB on page 8 of the report. Most of those are relatively straightforward. The increase is around 2% for things like extra elective care or planned care in hospitals. But the one I would point out to the board and to the public is the extra 4.2% uplift, rising to 5.5% uplift for additional community services spend. And that's all part of the desire in the NHS 10-year plan to increase community services and what we call that left shift in terms of more services and care in the community rather than directly in a hospital. And how we spend that money over the coming years, over the next 10 years, will be crucial to success. I would, though, ask you to note the very low national uplift for drugs. The uplift for drugs in the national assumptions is 0.1%, so effectively flat. And that's because NHS England believe that drug prices will be coming down on some certain key drugs as they switch from to a sort of like a generic rather than a branded drug price. However, we're all probably aware that there is risks to inflation on drug prices that maybe are not factored into those NHS workings at that point in time, and that is a risk that we are very conscious of. On convergence, I feel that the last 3 times I've presented reports to the board on the plan for the year, I've had to mention convergence and the fact that we will be like losing growth funding between 0.5 and 1% every year. And if our budget is £10 billion, 1% loss would be approximately £100 million. So I'm really pleased to report that the ICB now is deemed to be no longer overfunded. It is deemed to be almost exactly funded the right level. And what that means is we're not losing convergence funding this year. So that's effectively £100 million saving, you could sort of argue, that has come to the ICB this financial year, or at least money that we've not lost. The other good news to share is that we've had a movement nationally to move elective recovery funding, so that is funding that is used to help systems and providers achieve 18-week targets for planned care. The ICB received significant additional funds for 26-27 in line with the fair sharing formula. And what that basically means is an additional £40 million, which would equate to approximately a 4% increase in elective activity, and we fed that funding into provider contracts. I've laid out the 3-year financial plan within the appendices at the end of the report, Chair. They're the colourful slides at the end, and hopefully they provide a useful summary. I won't go through those in detail, but if anybody wants to ask me any questions about those or clarifications, I'm more than happy to do so. The report itself, you can see, shows a break-even plan for the ICB for every year. It does require internal efficiencies around £110 million each year. They are levels that we've generally achieved every single year since I've been the CFO, and they're required to fund things that basically maybe NHS England growth funding doesn't cover. And that's pressures in packages of care or prescribing. We've seen increases in ADHD assessments, and we are required to provide non-recurrent financial support to some of our providers until they get to a more sustainable footing. If you look at table 3 on page 10, you'll see a high-level overview of the financial plan. I won't go through that in any great detail, but you'll hopefully see from there the level of growth funding we've got, the level of efficiencies, and how we get back to a balanced plan for the year ahead. I'll touch on risk and mitigations, Chair, if that's okay. The risk for the ICB this year, I estimate to be around £30 million of unmitigated risk. That is very similar to the level we had last year. And as I said last year, that will be challenging, but it is no more challenging than it was in the previous year. What it doesn't include yet is maybe some of the other risks that maybe are starting to percolate at the moment. So there is potential additional risk around things like strike action or inflation as a result of war in Iran. On capital side of things, Chair, I just ask members to be aware and to note that there's been significant additional capital made available by Treasury via NHS England. The amount of capital we've got, for example, as an ICB is treble the amount that we would normally be responsible for, and there is significant additional allocation increases across the region for mainly achieving constitutional standards, which was also focused on. That's the last thing I want to mention about the ICB plan. I'll just touch on the ICS financial plan because, as I said, Chair, we're no longer responsible for FT financial plans. We do, though, work very closely with region this transitional year. I did share with the extraordinary board that a number of providers, about 3 providers, were struggling to put a balanced plan or an acceptable plan to NHS England. As at this point in time today, a lot of work's gone on in that area, and I do believe our local providers have plans that I believe are much more acceptable to NHS England, and I'm hopeful that those plans that they've had to submit in the last few days will be considered to be compliant, and we'll find that out in due course. That's all I want to say on the finance. Hopefully it wasn't too much, Chair, but I was going to hand over now to Jacqueline.
Thank you. Jacqueline, yes.
So carry straight on.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, David, and thanks, Chair. So I'll just, if I may, comment on the performance aspects of the report that's before you, which, as David said, is really largely a rerun of what was presented to the Extraordinary Board on the 12th. As is clear in the report, but I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that there are a number of national waiting time standards that the aggregate position for our providers across North East and North Cumbria and is not compliant with the ASK in the planning guidance for the next 3 years. I just want to give a bit of context to that. Perhaps the most significant standard is on the planned care side, the well-known referral to treatment target, where the original, if you like, constitutional standard was that no more than so at least 92% of people who are on an active waiting list should be waiting under 18 weeks. As the board knows, that target's not been met for many years, since before the COVID period. And in this 3-year planning round, all providers are asked to return to that 92% standard by the end of the 3-year period, so by March 29. That's a really significant improvement. Nationally, as you know, currently it's about 65%, and here in the ICB we're delivering around 70%. So to get from 70% to 92 across 3 years of business is certainly a challenging ask. We do believe it's an achievable ask, as David's mentioned. There's 4% additional funding been put in, and there are also opportunities to improve productivity, redesign pathways and so on to achieve that significant improvement over the 3 years. In that context, the draft plan, which sees us to get to 90.9% by year 3, which is just over 1% away from ask, we've got a long way, but there's still a bit further to go. And there's a similar picture on the couple of the cancer standards, notably the 62-day one, where what's in the report is a non-compliant plan, albeit one that's got 95% of the distance to achieve. So you won't be surprised to hear that we're not quite at the end of the story. And we are, with NHS England, in our regional colleagues, continuing to have conversations with a minority of providers who haven't got a compliant plan, which in turn is meaning our aggregate plan for the system is not yet compliant. And at the end of the discussion, Chair, if I may, I would like to just slightly augment the recommendations to say that where we are able to agree more ambitious plans with our providers, that we have delegated authority to include those in our aggregate plans and update those with the region. And we know that a couple of those are forthcoming today, so that's imminent. So yeah, in terms of the performance picture, I won't run through all of the individual standards, but just to say we are close but don't yet have a fully compliant plan, but further work is ongoing to get there within the allocations that have now been agreed for each of our providers. I'll just now pass briefly to Michelle so she can comment on the ICB workforce, then we can come back to the recommendations.
Okay, so Michelle Evans, Director of Workforce.
Yeah. Thank you. So, as previously mentioned within the report, this report focuses on the area of responsibility within the ICB. So the ICB doesn't have responsibility for submission of the workforce figures for secondary care. So the focus is on primary care and non-NHS mental health providers. So in the primary care area, you'll see that the workforce figures are remaining stable over the forecasted period. However, we'll caveat that does depend upon the development of our neighbourhood health programme, and that's also going to be linked to the publication of the integrated neighbourhood health framework. So we will review that once those publications are out and available. In terms of the non-NHS mental health, we're anticipating a growth in talking therapies, which is in line with the autumn statement. However, we're still working through the commissioning and procurement arrangements for that, so it's unclear whether that will remain within the non-NHS arena or if it will come into some of the providers. And also, we're anticipating to expand the workforce in our IPS services to meet national ambitions as well.
Okay. Anything else anyone wanted to add before we move into discussion?
No, I think we can move into questions and then recommendations,
Okay.
Chair. Yeah.
So just before we do, if I could ask our Chief Executive to make any comments that she thinks we ought to take into account of our thinking of risks to the operation and cost of the NHS as a result of the conflict in the Middle East.
Thank you, Salim. I think probably the first thing to say is just over 20% of the NHS workforce are representative of over 200 countries globally. It's a very diverse workforce. So I think the first thing to say is that we will have many colleagues potentially impacted personally by the conflict that we've seen. I mean, we're obviously not immune to conflict, and some of it's been fairly long-standing at a global footing, but it will be quite a worrying time for colleagues with friends and family in the areas affected by the conflict. So I think that's the first thing I just wanted to say. There obviously are some, I think, risks for us as a board that we need to add to our risk register. We need to look at mitigations for. So I think just firstly, as David set out, the plan's predicated on inflation being at 1.7%. But given some of the reports that we're seeing, particularly the impact on fuel costs and other areas, we could probably predict and potentially, I think probably what we should do is look to do some scenario modelling on increases in inflation over that period, and then look at potential contingencies as a board. You may have seen in the press recently the issue around cement for orthopaedic operations, and I think that showed up a vulnerability in the supply chain. We were able to handle that through good collaborative work across our provider trusts, but we've talked to our NHS provider collaborative in our system around really examining the just-in-time supply chain in terms of clinical supplies to understand perhaps where we have got the greatest vulnerabilities that we need to consider. And inevitably, there's also potential increased risks in areas like cybersecurity. So, Chair, I think what we need to do is do a full assessment of these and do some scenario planning from a financial perspective to make sure that we're kind of sighted on that and we can take action in year as and when we need to, as well as obviously start to work through anything we need to consider from a resilience perspective in terms of emergency planning responses.
And just on obviously you mentioned the cement, but if there was a widespread interruption of medication, including those that are basically maintaining life, such as antihypertensive medicines and so on, is there any ability to set in place contingency plans for that?
I think we'd be working with the national system in those instances, Salim, and obviously national planners will be examining these things, and our emergency planning individuals will be considering all of these particular issues, and we'd work with our national colleagues in terms of how we would respond to that. If you're asking though if we are stockpiling things, the answer is no. We're certainly not in the business of stockpiling anything at the moment, so we'd have to coordinate and assess any implications of that through the national frameworks for emergency planning.
Thank you. So we'll throw it open to any comments or questions on this item 12 on the agenda. Sir Pally.
I wonder if I might ask our Chief Finance Officer, in light of the fact that we're striving towards equality of access and of quality right across our region, what processes do we have for managing an overall budget and the transfer of funds between trusts when things could be done better or more efficiently elsewhere?
Well, that's a really tough question, Pally. How I would answer that is in a number of ways, basically. So in terms of, one of our key responsibilities of an ICB is to ensure that we allocate resources fairly across geographies. And we do have a resource allocation group that every year identifies, are we allocating resources to the right places fairly? And the only place that's ever been identified as being underfunded was Middlesbrough, and we put a plan in place over 4 years to address that, and that's in the plan, if you saw it in the narrative. In terms of equity of resources across the patch, and we touched on today in terms of dental, for example, not in dental, in terms of AQP for hearing aid. I actually think that one of the benefits of the way that we're going to set up the ICB going forward and provide more autonomy to commissioning teams who work more closely should enable us to do more work in that space in terms of having the right services and more equal services across geographies, okay, because the responsibilities will lay, if you like, in those commissioning teams. We do obviously look at these things all the time. A good example would be the local enhanced services review that we've done recently, where we've looked to ensure that we've got the right services across the patch. And you've got to remember, it's not always black and white, because what you might find is we might not have a service in primary or community, and that might be because it's in acute, or vice versa. So it's never as straightforward as just saying there's a gap here and what we're going to do about that. But I do think the way we've looked to set up the organisation going forward should enable us to be better.
What if the waiting list situation is better in one locality than another? How is the transfer of funds, and how are we going to manage that? Will it be our responsibility? Jackie might want to come in. It's definitely our responsibility to ensure that we're commissioning levels of activity that we want to see in our geographies and our populations. But do remember NHS England also set out guidelines about expected improvements in individual foundation trusts. So your starting point might be different, but the levels everybody's trying to get to is the same, and the journey might be slightly different in terms of the starting point. And I think basically, Pally, I think going forward we'll have more freedom as an ICB to direct where we think the resources need to go to as an ICB as a strategic commissioner. Okay, and I think that's basically what we'll be getting into in terms of where do we think the additional resources need to go from an ICB commissioner, where we don't really have to think quite so much about what's the impact on an individual provider, as long as we give them fair warning about what we're doing and why.
Okay, thank you very much. David Stout.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chairman. Just two quick questions. Within the initiatives to deliver more efficiencies within the ICB, there's service change initiatives, 30 million. Will there likely be some slippage on that in the first year? It depends whether we're ready to go or whether we need to actually engage to deliver the 30 million. And really, if there was slippage, will you factor that in on non-recurrent resources, etc.?
When you say slippage, do you mean negative as in shortfall or slippage as in positive? Do you mean shortfall?
Okay.
Do you mean like we might not make the full £30 million, we might only make 25 million?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes, that was my question.
So
yes.
The good news I can show you, David, is actually when we've done the work in the second half of this year in terms of developing those plans, which our medical director does a lot of the lead in that work in that area, is that we're confident that the vast majority of that £13 million is almost already in the bag.
Yeah, okay, great.
Because we're not spending it. We decide we're going to not spend it on things. So there is good news there. If anything, there's a chance we might be able to over-deliver. Okay, but we're not factored that into any plans whatsoever because I just think it's not prudent.
That's great.
But what we do need to do now is the work for the following years, because I think the following years are going to be more challenging.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
And my second question is around resource allocation. You said that there's no convergence required now because we're deemed to be at target or very close to target under resource allocation. we were unhappy previously about the resource allocation methodology and our purported share of that. Are we now content, or do we need to do some work over the next couple of years to see whether, in fact, actually we're still under target, and in 3 years' time, when there's a new resource allocation, we actually should get a better share? Or are we saying, you know, we're fine, we're happy with the outcome?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's two parts to that answer, David. So the first one is we're obviously happier,
yes,
with the numbers that have come up now, and work has been done nationally to, if you like, reset the fair share formula led by NHS England, and obviously we would support that because we think that was the right thing to do, and that's been part of a national programme around fair share allocations. Okay, in terms of are we completely happy, I would argue that we still have some areas of concern that we've raised in our formal report to NHS England, and I've been assured they will be looking at picking it up as part of their normal processes. Part one, we're happy. Part two, there are still some areas of where we've raised where we'd ask NHS England to have a look at these areas just to check whether or not North East North Cumbria is actually maybe slightly underfunded rather than bang on funding levels. But that'll take a bit of work for NHS England to work through in terms of that report that we shared with them.
But are you optimistic that we will get a response in due course?
We'll absolutely get a response. Yeah, I've had conversations with those leads who've received the report and have absolutely assured me of that, yes.
Great, thank you very much.
Sam?
Just to follow up on that briefly, because you're absolutely right, this has been something we've discussed historically. I have written formally to the chair of ACRA, which is the panel that reviews the allocations, to make further kind of ongoing kind of representations around the further work that needs to be undertaken. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. Thank you.
So it looks like there's no more comments or questions. So can I just take you through what we're being asked to agree to? So firstly, to approve the updated ICB revenue budgets for 2026-27. Is everybody happy to do that? Secondly, ratify the full ICB 3-year finance, workforce, activity and performance submissions for 2026-27 to 2028-29. Are you content with the proposals there? And then,
Salim,
yes.
Sorry, just if I may, on that middle one, that's the one where I was hoping that we could extend some delegation to accept any further improvements into those performance trajectories. We had thought when we wrote the paper we wouldn't get to go any further, but we've now got indication that some of the trusts are looking to improve their position. So with that caveat, I am supportive, but I was hoping we could adopt that.
Is everybody happy with the caveat? Yeah, thank you. And then note the requirement for robust quality impact assessments to be carried out for the efficiency schemes in line with the approved ICB policy. Everybody happy with that? Okay, thank you. So that concludes discussion on item 12. And there's no item 13, presumably to avoid bad luck, but item 14 is the oral health strategy and primary care dental access recovery programme update. And Dave Gallagher, our Chief Contracting Procurement Officer, is going to talk us through that.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Over the last 3 or 4 years, colleagues will remember we've discussed, the challenges of commissioning dental services for the North East of Cumbria, but much more importantly, the challenges local people have accessing both routine dental care and urgent dental care. So what I thought might be useful just to give an end-of-year report, if you like, in terms of the work that's been undertaken by the dental team, but other teams within the ICB and beyond, to get us to a better position with that, not the finished product, but to a better position. So the report just picks out a number of key actions and key areas that we've undertaken. In terms of routine dental care and specialist services, by next year we'll have recommissioned, and that's recommissioned because we've had contract handbacks, 327,000 UDAs, it's a dental activity. As we know, we've talked about a number of times in the board, we've commissioned additional urgent access, and particularly through the urgent dental access centres, which will deliver 109,000 appointments per year for next year going forward. We've also tried to support the sustainability of dental practices and retention of dentists and other staff by increasing the rate of pay for dental practices to the new national minimum requirement. And we've put in place loyalty payments for those dentists who we would want to retain and keep within the NHS, which has had quite a bit of success. Just as importantly, there's been lots of activity involving colleagues in the wider ICS, most notably from local authorities, but from the combined authorities, with some great help from Health Watch and colleagues across Health Watch to actually make steps to improve the oral health of people in the North East and North Cumbria. All of that's been supplemented most recently by a big campaign to actually provide more information for patients and stakeholders using the portal that we've now got on the ICB website, which includes the ability to actually launch into the opportunity to book into the UDACs and other services. The paper looks at some of the business as usual stuff that the team have got on with, but just wanted to focus on a number of areas where we tend not to compare ourselves against other ICBs, and importantly, our focus is on the people for the North East and North Cumbria. But if we look at some of the comparisons with the highest ICB for the number of activity units commissioned per head of population, which is 1.45 against an England average of 1.28. We're within the top 5 ICBs for improvement in urgent and unscheduled courses of treatment, and that's despite the challenge that we've had highlighted in the report earlier on, linking the way that things are counted. And the access rate for both adults and children for dental services is now above the England average, which is testament to the hard work of the team. One of the risks that we've had in year has been the way that the urgent access has been counted nationally, and despite us fulfilling the requirement to provide the number of appointment slots, it looks as though we'll end the year at a projected 84% against that national ask. That's really related to how the things are counted, and we've had conversations with the national team. Going forward, there's some relaxation of the rules of what urgent access is about, which will help us pull that back round. Big limiting factor going forward is continuing recruitment and retention of staff within dentistry, and there's an unknown in terms of the new dental contract quality and payment reforms that kick in from tomorrow. Because some of that is discretionary for practices, we don't know if they'll take them up, so we don't really know the impact that will have going forward. But Chair, really wanted to share with this because I think this is a really good example of where the dental team in this instance, as one among many of the teams in the ICB, have actually stuck to their roles, stuck to the purpose despite everything else that's going on, and have got us to a better place and local people to a better place, but recognising there's more work to go forward. So it's there for information, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, David. And just to clarify, it was 14 in my briefing, but it's actually 13 on the agenda.
Unlucky
and then, David, you won't be surprised to hear me get in first to ask what's happening with fluoridation.
Fluoridation is happening. Colleagues will recall there was a national consultation on that, but specific to the North East. That has been agreed, and colleagues in Northumbria Water are working now to get in place the capital wherewithal to make sure that the water is fluoridated. But it will take a little while to kick in.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Dave, for you. Yet another tribute to you, I think, but for your leadership of this very important programme, which has seriously moved the dial, really, on responding to needs. So thank you very, very much. Comments or questions? Sam, you want to come in?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, first of all, I just really want to commend our dental commissioning team. This was a group of colleagues who transferred to us from NHS England, and they've had a really significant piece of work to do, and particularly post-pandemic, where we saw fundamentally sort of NHS dentistry services change. And I think the network of the 23 urgent dental access centres is really significant, and also the fact that members of the public can book direct access into those on the website, which I think was a first in the country, I really want to commend the team, obviously led by Pauline, Dave, but also with your guidance and leadership. I did just want to pick out one thing. You sort of touched on it a little bit, Dave, but again, I think speaks to the prevention end, because if we sort out the urgent access, or sort of trying to stem the tide of the urgent problems, but we really want to kind of get upstream, if you like, and do the more preventative work. And I think, again, working with the combined authority, the mayoral authority, on particularly their ambition around tackling child poverty and the resources that we've allocated, particularly around getting into schools and education and teeth brushing. It's getting back to the basics, but it's really, really, really fundamentally important, as is getting fluoride in the water as well, because we know that can certainly protect people's teeth. But I really just wanted to commend our dental team. They've done a really outstanding job under some really challenging circumstances.
Thank you, Sam. Rajesh Nadkarni.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And as an ICB board member over the last few years, when we've discussed this issue, and I remember over the last, maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, when we were talking about it, thinking, can we really make an impact? And today, finally, your report just makes it clear. I think there's been huge strides. So thank you to yourself, the commissioning team, and everybody else involved. I had one question about the urgent and unscheduled appointments, and I think a lot of that was based around the urgent care centres also, wasn't it, which we commissioned and developed. Do you think that has also helped in improving or providing the right access to some of the rural and coastal areas on our patch, or does that still present a bit of a challenge?
Thanks, Rajesh. I think it's gone a long way to doing that. The centres that we've got are spread strategically around the North East and North Cumbria, including Whitehaven, for example, on the coast and the West Coast. Yes, it provides some of the solution. There's lots more work to be done. There are some examples, and been working with Tom and his team in South Tyneside to look to actually expand the role of the UDAC. So they're doing some Making Every Contact Counts work in South Tyneside, and that there is more work that could be done to actually provide better access to local people where they can't get access to a high street dentist as such. But yeah, lots of progress being made, but still lots more to do.
Well, that concludes item 14. So we are ready to break for lunch, and we're resuming at 1 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, well, welcome back everybody, and for those listening online, we're resuming the meeting of the ICB for North East and North Cumbria, and I'm Liam Donaldson, the chair. This last item on women's health is a very important one. We've been planning it and looking forward to it for some time, and one big part of the planning was hoping that we could be joined by Dame Leslie Regan, who is the Women's Health Ambassador for England. I'm very pleased that she is able to join us, and you'll be hearing from her in a moment. But Dame Leslie is a Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Imperial College London, and she has more than 40 years clinical and academic experience in women's health. I first knew her as President of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists when I was Chief Medical Officer, and college presidents were a very important part of me getting my job right as Chief Medical Officer. And Leslie was a very, very distinguished and influential chair, president of the college at that time. But her new role, and she's been doing it for some time now, is as Women's Health Ambassador for England. And in that capacity, she's been touring the country and giving the government advice on the judgments that she makes about the adequacy or otherwise of women's health services in the NHS. And she's been kind enough to spend some time today in our ICS looking at services in both Gateshead and Sunderland and South Tyneside. So before I ask Dame Leslie to speak, Claire Riley, our Chief Corporate Services Officer, who's been doing with Sam Allen, our Chief Executive, a lot of the developmental work on women's health services, is going to tell you a little bit about what's been happening in our two hubs.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to share with the board our progress regarding women's health. And hopefully today provides you all with the assurance of our work to date, but also our ambition for 2025 to 2030. But firstly, can I just take this opportunity to thank Dame Leslie Regan for her guidance and leadership in this area. And I think without her, we absolutely wouldn't be as far along on our journey. And also our CEO, Sam Allen, for her drive and commitment to ensure we deliver for 51% of the population. I also would like to thank the team for all of their hard work, but also our partners in local government and OHID. We've worked really closely with to look at the data analysis to make sure that that drives our activity going forward. So thank you to them too. Now, I can't believe anybody would sitting around this table would say, why women's health? Why does it matter? And if you did, you may feel the wrath of the women sitting next to you, actually, so it's probably best not. But we are 51% of the population, and we are here to do more than just have babies. And the reality is the way that our health service has been engineered, it has not been to support 51% of the population. On average, we spend 21 years in poor health, and that is longer than than men. And our region has the lowest healthy life expectancy, and we have an eight-year gap, just over 8 years, between those within the least deprived and those in the most deprived. But also, just to confirm, it is economic too. So if you look at the numbers of our women who are economically inactive, actually 28% of them are through sickness or ill health. And that has a massive impact on our economy overall. So we must see women's health, yes, as an important factor in our health strategy, but actually as an important factor in our economic growth strategy going forward. And that is work that we are working with our combined authority on as part of the Health and Growth Accelerator. Dame Leslie is here and she will talk about the Women's Health Strategy, which was published firstly in August 22, and there is a renewal that will be published soon. But what we've been focusing on is actually how do we turn this national ambition into a local ambition for our region. And what we started with is talking to women. So whilst there was a national strategy there, we wanted to understand what women thought in our region. And we were delighted with the amount of engagement that took place over the months, and with some fantastic help and support from Health Watch and also the voluntary and community sector. And we specifically targeted also some seldom heard groups, making sure that their voice was heard through this engagement process. And since the launch of the national plan, we continue to invest in women's health, and we are probably one of the only integrated care boards who are doing this out with what they would normally do for commission services. So on top of the national monies that we received, which it was under £500,000, we've invested over £1 million, and we have an ongoing commitment to invest in women's health going forward. We have been working hard on a 5-year women's health plan, and also created Learning Disabilities Menopause Passport. And hopefully one of the case studies that I'll share with you today will give you a good reason as to why we focus some attention on those areas. We've also worked with our colleagues in Audit on a women's health profile, and actually that's just been updated yesterday. We've received that, and that is information and data that will help us to look at our strategic commissioning intentions going forward. I've already mentioned the big conversation where we had over 5,000 women take part in our conversation about women's health, and who want to continue to take part in our conversation about women's health. We've also co-designed a violence against women and girls audit tool to address the unacceptable impact of violence against women and girls, and to really raise awareness about the activities that we need to deliver. We've also done a lot of work around menopause policy, especially helping NHS organisations to get their own house in order, recognising the amount of women work within the NHS. We've also piloted 3 women's health hubs and supported that investment, as I already said. But what have we learned? We've learned that actually there's much we can do. 37% of pathways can be changed for women, and that is to make sure women get access to care as close as to their home as possible. We know so far, and this is only so far because we are still learning, that for every £1 investment there is an £8 benefit in investing in certainly the women's health hubs. And some of our hubs, especially in Sunderland and also in Gateshead, we've seen earlier detection of cervical cancer. We've also seen that as a result of changes to providing LARC services in community rather than in the hospital, there are secondary care cost savings as a result of that. And we only have technically now 2 hubs operating in our region. If that was replicated across all of our region, you would expect there to be further savings across all of that. And recognising that also, we certainly from the feedback from women, the quality of life improvements, we've reduced waiting times and we've improved access to care. And that has got to be a good thing, especially based on the waiting times and the data linked to that. We've also been focusing on more staff trained in the community around women's health, recognising that there's a lot of work still to do there. And our hubs have been trailblazers in this area. And what I want to share with you first is a patient story from our Gateshead Women's Health Gateway, which I know Dame Leslie visited this morning.
I was very sore, very uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Do things in the garden, take my dog out. Even silly things like getting into bed was quite uncomfortable. When I came down to see Dr. Bomasetti, I honestly thought she was going to send us to hospital because I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be in a hospital environment.
The main issue was the waiting times when we referred ladies to gynaecology, they would have been referred and have quite a long wait to be seen. Some things could actually be treated in general practice rather than needing to go to secondary care. For example, pessaries for vaginal prolapse, or even coils for the heavy periods.
In Gateshead, we were noticing rising gynecology waiting lists, and this was despite actually putting so much effort into our Women's Health Hub and community services. So we decided to look at this closely, and we saw that we had increased primary care capacity. We had certainly kind of extended non-contraceptive LARC delivery in the community. We had introduced an enhanced service for pessary insertion in the community, and our VCSE colleagues were delivering menopause clinics. There was so much work that was going on, so the clinical basis was absolutely solid. That insight became the catalyst for change. So we deliberately regrouped and we reframed what it is that we were intending to do.
With the Women's Health Gateway, what we're doing, we're working very closely with our GPs in the Gateway to really examine, really assess referrals to determine who the right person to see the patient is, where they should be seen. Do they need to be seen in a hospital setting, or can they be seen in the community? And where in the community can they be seen? And really ultimately trying to do the right thing for the patient first time. So the work we've done around the Gateway has shown that about 30% of patients can be seen in settings other than hospitals. So this could be community-based settings. And the upshot of that, of course, means that the number of patients waiting for an appointment in secondary care in hospitals will go down. And this means that patients will be seen quicker and get answers and treatment quicker. The Women's Health Gateway really is key to achieving our ambition as a trust, as an organisation, to become a centre of excellence for women's health. The Gateway will let us provide care closer to people's homes, closer to where they live, more efficiently, so they get answers to their problems quicker. The Gateway really aligns well with the NHS 10-year plan to move services from secondary care into the community, so care is provided closer to people's homes.
The Women's Health Gateway has been doing some excellent work in their outreach programme. So my practice, for example, has a specialist drug and alcohol clinic. So we have a lot of very vulnerable women, and the work that the Women's Health Gateway has been doing in reaching out to Women Through Drugs and Alcohol Service, the Homeless Service, Refugee Service, in reaching some of those women who historically have been very difficult to engage in their healthcare, and being more proactive in making sure that they are not disadvantaged further.
This piece of work has been about system transformation, and we're all very proud of what it is that we've achieved together. We are in the early part of our journey together with the women of Gateshead, and we hope to demonstrate that this system partnership will bring positive change.
It's changed my life completely. I can do everything I did before. I'm happier. When you have your own doctor, you know them personally and they know you. They understand how you feel, and I just think that's the most important.
So hopefully the facts speak for themselves. Actually, the impact that quite a small amount of investment can have on women's lives is quite impressive, really. And I'd just like to thank those people who have had a leadership and delivery role in the hubs, because it is making a difference now to women's lives, and that is why we are keen to continue to support them going forward, and also spread them further across our region. We've already heard about the Gateshead Women's Health Gateway, but just to be clear, it is quite extensive, and underpinning all of that work is partnership. And actually it is a representative of what is detailed in the 10-year plan around left shift, and also the importance of strength of partnership as we develop integrated neighbourhood teams. And Lisa, you'll be pleased to see that obviously the voluntary and community sector have been heavily represented as part of this work too. And just to share with you where our investment has gone over recent years, you can see that we have targeted our women's health investment based on where women wanted to see investment and where they felt it would make a difference. And whilst we are doing some further deep dive work regarding the data and the analysis of this to influence then future strategic commissioning intentions, it doesn't stop us from investing in those areas that we know it will make a difference now. But what will drive us, and hopefully, if you don't mind, I have another patient story. It is not a film because of the sensitive nature of this, but this is about Lottie, and this is a real-life experience that, frankly, is sad, but heartening that actually we have picked it up. But Lottie is a woman in her mid-40s with learning disabilities, and she lives alone in a flat. She receives 2 hours of support each morning and 3 hours at night for personal care, for meal preparation and for medication. Lottie has historically attended day services 5 days a week. She enjoyed going on holidays, having days of fun, and Lottie was referred into the Community Learning and Disability team because she started to experience low mood, anxiety and changes in her behaviour. Lottie started to refuse to go to the day service. She was exhausted and wanted to just be in bed. She was refusing help from her support team. She destroyed some of her personal belongings. She felt angry a lot of the time, and there was a lot of complaints about her from her neighbours. She didn't want to go on any holidays anymore, and her quality of life was significantly impacted. Things became so difficult that her tenancy agreement was terminated. So she was losing her home. An appointment was made with a GP and menopause was discussed. However, the GP advised Lottie's change in behaviour was down to her learning disability and fluoxetine was prescribed. Changes were made to her staff team and her days at the day service were reduced because of her behaviour and tiredness. Her symptoms and behaviours continued and a positive behavioural support plan was put in place. The GP requested a referral to Learning Disability Psychiatric team to assess an increase in fluoxetine as a result of her escalating behaviour. Nothing changed for Lottie, and her support team were asking for her to be admitted to an assessment and treatment centre. Eventually, Lottie was seen by another GP. This GP prescribed HRT in a tablet form. Lottie refused the tablets. HRT was then prescribed in patches, which Lottie accepted. Over time, with regular reviews with the GP and support with HRT, it took effect, the help took effect, and started to have a positive impact on Lottie's life. Accessible information was given to Lottie to support her care and support her understanding of what she was going through. She moved into a new house with a garden, and her symptoms continued to improve. She was discharged from the Community Learning Disabilities team. That is a really good example of why women's health is important, but also why we also need to take account of those that are seldom heard. And the voluntary and community sector with the Learning Disabilities team have absolutely helped us with this. But there's also a cost-benefit analysis. HRT costs £400 on average per year. If Lottie had been detained or put into a secure inpatient unit, it would have cost £200,000. And I hope you don't mind me sharing that story, but this is what is driving us. And what else is driving us is what else is happening in our communities. Every 30 seconds, police record a domestic abuse offence. That's every 30 seconds. Think about the length of time we've been in this room today and think about how many women have been impacted during that time. On average, 1 woman is killed by an abusive partner or by an ex every 5 days. And it is estimated that 3 women die by suicide as a result of domestic abuse. There's a lot of talk about violence against women and girls, and there's a lot of debate and discussion around how do we certainly reduce by the end of this Parliament, which is the government commitment, by half. We all have a part to play, and I know, Tom, you are absolutely an expert in this with your local authority colleagues, but what we see in the NHS is the impact that this has, and it has significant impact not just on women, but also children too. And what we've been really keen to do is look to see what can we do in primary care, in our systems, to make sure that we are doing everything we can to play our part in supporting women who are impacted as a result of violence or domestic violence. And we've been working with trauma-informed, we've been doing training, around trauma-informed for staff, just to make sure that that also impacts. And one of the case studies that we've been working with a GP practice in Newcastle is actually making sure we are also supporting perpetrators, recognising that those people who need support and are reaching out for support get the help that they need, but also recognising that that is also a route into supporting the women who are impacted too, because very often this goes underreported, as we know. And we're starting to see some green shoots in that work, and we are seeing an increase in referrals into the perpetrator programme by 10%, which is, of course, good to see, and hope that that continues. But we also need to recognise that it also happens within our NHS, and you just need to look at our staff survey results around sexual harassment across our NHS organisations to note that this has been an issue over recent years. And what is good, all of our organisations have signed up to the Sexual Safety Charter, and we were the first in the region to do that, and we continue to raise the profile of this work and make sure that women are supported when required. And beyond services, we also know that we need to address the stigma that exists around women's health, and make sure that we continue to listen to patients and the public as we implement the 5-year strategy. And as we evolve, Leslie, you will be launching your new strategy, and we will want to make sure we reflect that in our plans going forward too. But making sure we have a health system built around women, and a health system with services for women that are built around women. And the data tells us that we need to do this. 241,000 or over 241,000 women are economically inactive. Employment rates for women lag behind men. Access to care, unplanned hospital admissions are higher for women. If you look at our waiting list for gynaecology, and we certainly have seen that coming through the Health and Growth Accelerator, and that the impact that that has on sickness and ill health. And then there are the mental health statistics too, Rajesh, that I'm sure that you're more than familiar with, recognising that that does have an impact on premature mental illness deaths in our region. We also know that with regards to long-acting reversible contraceptions, use is actually rising in women 25 or over. But there is huge variation in what we're seeing with the data for women's health across our region, that we have a level of variation that is unacceptable, and we must look at some consistency across that. And whilst teenage pregnancies are declining, they are still the highest in Middlesbrough and Redcar. So we have some specific targeted work that we must do in certain communities. And again, while smoking in pregnancy is down, we have worse than the England average in our region. Cervical screening rates, worryingly, continues to fall in the age group of 25 to 49, but there is a significant difference between those that are taking up cervical screening in the least deprived versus the most deprived, as you would expect, no doubt. So what we've done is we've looked at what women want through our engagement Big Conversation for Women's Health. We've looked at the Women's Health Strategy. We've also looked at the data, and what we've pulled together is a health plan for 2025-2030 to influence our strategic commissioning intentions going forward. And these are our ambitions. We have 8 ambitions. They are all linked to those areas I've mentioned earlier with regards to what women wanted us to see, but it also aligns to the national programme too. And it creates us a clear action plan to move forward, and also allow us to mobilise our partners behind a common goal too. And our themes that will support this, and something that I know, Chair, that you'll be very interested in, is we must get this we must use the data to lead us, to make sure that we focus in on those areas of improvement, but also those areas of variation. We know that we've got a significant amount of work to do around the workforce and training for women's health. And whilst we have started that journey, especially in our hubs have allowed us to do that, we've still got much more to do. We know, Tom, with regards to prevention, there is much more that we can collaborate on. And I know that most recently with local government, we've co-funded and collaborated on a sexual health campaign, The Elephant in the Room. And there's much more that we can do about that, including the violence against women and girls. And I know that we do that in any way. But also what I think we really are keen to see as an ICB is how does this data lead into our future strategic commission and intentions, and I think that will be where we can really make the shift from hospital to community and support women for better outcomes. That is my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Well, thank you, Claire. I think we'll probably work best if we hear from Dame Leslie and then we have a discussion on the two presentations. So over to you.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. In fact, Sam wanted me to come last year, and then there was a few unexpected announcements, weren't there, from the government about what was going to happen to NHS England and to the DH. And in the meanwhile, I've just been pushing on, quite determined that we are never ever going to allow women to slip backwards. But I'm going to give you a little snapshot. I was asked to talk about why it was important nationally to have a women's health strategy. I suspect I'm preaching to the converted, but I do love a Chinese proverb, and this is very much the best one. Women hold up half the sky. But of course, I'm going to persuade you in the next 20 minutes that they hold up a lot more than half the sky. Because not only are they, half of the workforce, but they undertake more than 2/3 of all the unpaid caring roles in society. And most importantly, they make 80% of all household health decisions. So if we get it right for women, everybody benefits. So this is my life course approach style. So when I was president of the RCOG, I wrote a report called Better for Women, and it was centred around a life course approach and this slide. Now, I hope you're going to tell me that this is a bit outdated now, because as you can see, it sort of finishes at 60 or 70. I want to make the point to you that when I first became a vice president of the RCOG, the secretaries of state, one after another, used to think that women's health was maternity. They were just incubators, and they forgot about all the other parts in a woman's life that are so important. And I mention that point because you'll see on that graph that there's a very faint line that says pregnancies. 4 out of 5 women now become mothers. 1 out of 5 don't, either by choice or because they can't. But our society is really changing. And the other point I want to make to you is that when I left medical school in the 1980s, women disappeared from view at 50, at that menopause thing. And then there was a little bit of cancer screening that went on later, but most of the time we waited for them to rock up with a problem, which was usually pretty insoluble by the time they presented. If we go back to the teenage years, you'll see that the really important things that affect every girl and woman are having your HPV vaccine. Cervical cancer is a totally preventable disease now. Menstrual health. Do you know of anything else that happens to human beings quite so commonly as 12 periods a year for 40 years of your life? Because most women only spend a couple of years in pregnancy now. And then you have contraception, which is absolutely crucial and is a very key part to all the problems with violence against women. When we get offer women contraception, or if we empower them to be in charge of with whom and how many times and when and how they become pregnant, they really are much, much safer. And we can go through the slide, but I want to just keep emphasising that pregnancy is a very small part of this. The thing I spent an academic career is that little tiny bit at the bottom, infertility and miscarriage. I mean, ridiculous. I know everything you need to know about the immunology of pregnancy loss, but does it really help women? I don't really think it does in the longer term. And the other point I'd just like to mention to you before I move on is that my daughters, I have twin daughters who, so I was only pregnant for about 7 or 8 months, they have got an actuarial lifespan of 100 years. So they're going to be the first generation of women that lives longer post-reproductively than when they were reproductive. And I really do think that our health service hasn't grasped hold of this yet, not just for women, but for men as well. We have got a service that is all sort of keyed up to 50 or 60, and then after that it's a bit of a free-for-all, isn't it, or luck. So I'm just going to take you through a few uncomfortable statistics, and sometimes when I use these slides, people will say to me, what, really? This country? And you don't mean that. You mean 1996, but I don't. Contraception, the most cost-effective intervention in the whole of healthcare, has become really difficult to access. 45% of all the pregnancies in this country today are unplanned. I'm not saying they're all unwanted, but they're unplanned, and we know that unplanned pregnancies or pregnancies with short interbirth intervals increase every single maternity complication, and they're always the ones that end up with the expensive disasters. We've got the highest teenage pregnancy rate in Europe. It's better than it was, but it's 5 times that in Holland. And we know that abortion rates are continuing to rise astronomically, really, really high. They've never been so high. And it's not in young girls. This is in middle-aged women, many of whom have completed their families, and they can't access long-acting reversible contraception or what they want to prevent an unwanted pregnancy. You speaking about cervical screening, Claire, and it's at an all-time low. This is really sad because we were in the vanguard of cervical screening. We showed the world how you could do this. And as I said earlier, it's a completely preventable disease now, and no woman should be dying of cancer of the cervix. But the point that I really want to emphasise, and I think often, unless you are a gynaecologist, you don't realise this fact, is that heavy menstrual bleeding has a massive, massive impact on society, not just girls and women. 1 in 3 gynaecology outpatient referrals are about heavy menstrual bleeding. When I came out of medical school, we only had hysterectomies to offer women. My trainees very rarely see a hysterectomy these days. I mean, there's a crowd of them come in if there's going to be one performed, because we've got all these other ways with LARC and menstrual regulation that we can stop this. But I want to just mention to you that in this country, as I speak, 1 in 3 women are iron deficient, and I thought I would include this because I was talking about this to Sam and Claire last night. And anemia is different from iron deficiency. So if you only measure haemoglobin, you miss all those women who've got no iron stores, and there's a massive intergenerational impact. So if you go into pregnancy with low iron stores, your fetus has a neurocognitive development delay that you can measure by the age of 3. The children have ADHD more frequently. One of the causes probably of teenage girls having this vast increase in ADHD diagnoses and autism is probably linked to iron deficiency because of untreated heavy periods. And they complain of being tired and washed out, poor concentration, unable to work. Trick one question always is your hair falling out? And this woman or girl will always say to me, how did you know? It's all over the shower. And it really is a problem which we can so treat. Maternal mortality, 3 times higher in black women. If I was a black woman and I'm pregnant at this moment in time, I think I'd be very angry, because we've known this data since 2017 when the Embrace first reported it. It's got a little bit better. The NHS resolution litigation costs for maternity accidents exceeds what we spend on delivering maternity care. Every maternal death in the last report in December 2025 had a high BMI, and suicide is now a leading cause of maternal death. Now, I think I'm often described as a robust personality, but if one of my daughters had killed herself because she was pregnant when she was a teenager, I'm not sure I'd have ever recovered from that. And then menopause, well, it's got quite an airing recently, thanks to a lot of celebrity input, but it's an inevitability. So any young woman who has periods is going to become menopausal. But this year, 400,000 women will become menopausal in this country, and 385,000 of them won't know what the hell's hit them. Their symptoms can go on for years and years. We know some of them have very severe symptoms. And if nothing else, I keep trying to say to people, look, we are the largest employer of people in Europe, the NHS, and 80% of our employees are women. So let's at least get things right for women. But we've been slow on that uptake. Now, if you talk about periods and the menopause over your dinner table, gentlemen, with all your women and girls in your life, I bet nobody talks about their urinary incontinence. but 1 in 3 women over the age of 60 will be leaking at some point. Some severely, some not severely. It's really disabling, and women become quite reclusive about it, and then starts the frailty, and then the downward spiral, and then the dementia. And if you think it's just about reproduction, it really is not. So the things that I'm most worried about are the 3 things that are going to kill me and all the other women in this room. And it's not cancer. It's cardiovascular disease and the complications of osteoporosis and frailty and dementia. And the symptoms of cardiovascular disease, unless you're a cardiologist, you don't often realise that their symptoms are different for women. They present differently, and that's why women have such poorer outcomes, while they're diagnosed much later with more severe disease. And then, surprise, surprise, we find that they don't respond to the interventions and the drugs in quite the same way because they were never included in the randomised trials. So troponin is a very good example. Troponin is what you measure when you go into A&E with an awful chest pain. But of course, women don't usually have chest pain and radiating left arm angina pain. They usually have indigestion or back pain, or they feel terribly tired. But when you measure their troponin levels, they're often sent home because the troponin normal ranges were all done in men. And it was only about 18 months ago that people woke up to the fact that actually troponin levels in women are much lower, and that's why we were missing so many of these heart attacks. And I suppose I should just mention as well, women are twice as likely to die from heart disease than from breast cancer. But when I get to the station later on today, if I went round with a little microphone and asked every woman what they were going to die of, she would probably tell me breast cancer or bowel cancer or lung cancer, depending what's just happened in her family. And she's so wrong, it's going to be heart disease. Osteoporosis and frailty, well, it's a really big problem. I mean, osteoporosis prevalence, 21%, that's 1 in 5 women are going to get not thinning bones, but fragile bones, compared to 6% in men. And we know that there are about 500,000 fragility fractures every year, which are meant to be a red flag. You need help with this, you need your vitamin D, you need your calcium, bisphosphonates. Of course, I would argue that the women all need HRT because the best bone builder you can find anywhere in the pharmaceutical world is estrogen. And then, oh, sorry, that's a double side. And then when it comes to dementia, it's more prevalent among women than men, not because they live longer, but because their prevalence is higher. They will wait longer to receive a diagnosis. And if you take an example, I've used Parkinson's here. If you think about women who've got Parkinson's, usually they're presenting, or the dominant symptom is tremor of the upper body, so the head or the upper limbs. In men, it's usually posture, it's that shuffling gait and feeling that they're unbalanced. So very, very different. So I think we owe it to women to stop, as I keep saying, admiring the problem and taking some action to fix it. So, as Claire mentioned, we had the Women's Health Strategy. I want to remind everybody that the public consultation was launched in 2021, and it was meant to be published a few months later, and it didn't get published then. It got published 18 months later because the DHSC was deluged by responses. There were over 100,000 women wrote in, and it wasn't just a few lines, it was pages and pages of how badly they'd been treated. And there were lots of expert reports as well. But the point that I wanted to make was that 84% of those 100,000 women told us that they had been ignored or dismissed or disbelieved. And that, of course, is underpins the importance of listening to what women want and not assuming that what I think that they want, or people that look like me, are going to be represented in all the women that need our help across the country. So, in years 1 to 2, we had a lot of implementation priorities, but I really wanted to focus on this concept of women's health hubs, which I rather naughtily now think is possibly the basis of the 10-year plan, because this whole idea about wrapping services around women in the community is really, really so crucial to our understanding and to the shift that we need to make. And I think it's really important that there were a lot of other things that happened, like access to HRT, prepaid certificates, and the information on the website, which is, the NHS website is not a sexy place to go, is it? It has to be blue, black or white, but at least it's now a lot more well organised and a lot more informative. And there is actually a women's health hub in which over 150 conditions are positioned there. I could go on about that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to talk a bit more about the health hubs, because I think that although they then became community community hubs, and now the buzzword is neighbourhood health. I don't mind what we call them, as long as the principle of wrapping the services around girls and women remains. And of course, around men and boys as well, because I'll mention to the end, every time I'm talking about this to a different specialty, i.e. not reproductive health, they all tell me about how they want to have this model as well. So in those first couple of years, we focused on these hubs, and I wanted to emphasise that it was not necessarily a place-based model. So some of the most successful you'd have heard about in Tower Hamlets and up in Liverpool are virtual triage centres, where someone senior sits down, 4 or 5 senior clinicians sit down with managerial staff, and they triage the referrals. And so, for example, in Tower Hamlets, they have reduced the number of women going into Whitechapel or the London Hospital by 85%. I mean, 85% has gone down to 25%. So it's been a massive, a 60% drop in the number of women being referred in, because they're being sent to either a one-stop shop or a hub-and-spoke model or a pop-up clinic, all sorts of different methods. Now, I don't suppose you would mind, Syra, if I sent you on a bus journey or even a train journey, if you knew that when you got there, you were going to get sorted out. What you're fed up with is going to 4 different places and being told that you can't have what you need. So virtual triage to send them to the right place at the right time and then really focus on it. Similarly, if I have an episode of postmenopausal bleeding, it is pointless me waiting to go to gynae outpatients for an ultrasound scan and blood test. What's that going to show? Because we know that what has to happen is I have to have an endometrial biopsy. So let's send you to a hub and spoke model that does hysteroscopies all the time. So if we really the impact of these women's or neighbourhood health hubs mean that list of 5 disorders or 5 maintenance issues in women's health could be sorted without ever sniffing anywhere in secondary care. Contraception and LARC provision, cervical screening and treatment, menstrual health management, pessary fitting and removal, incontinence advice, menopause assessment and treatment. And that's just for starters. What are the benefits? Well, don't worry about the left-hand side. Just look at the 5 points on the right-hand side. Improved access, reduced inequalities, really focuses on inequalities. And if you target your hub to look after the most deprived, you'll find that model works for everybody. Health system efficiencies, but the thing I hadn't really appreciated the real impact of when we started this was the enormous ability that the hub model has for workforce retention and for training. And you mentioned about how difficult it is to get the training up to speed, but if Liam came to assist me in a coil clinic for a day, you wouldn't need any more training than that. If we were fitting coils all day, you'd be an absolute guru by the end of it. And that's, of course, what you can offer in these hubs. So I thought I would now sort of ask myself a few questions. In years 2 and 3, so this is 23 to 24, things started to change. And I always like to think, why? So this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but there were some very important myth-busting reports came out from McKinsey and Deloitte and NHS Confederation. There were some very key collaborations forged with people and places, and of course we had new political leadership. So let's have a little look at that. But first of all, these myth-busting reports. So these are 4 myths about women's health that we really need to get completely over the line. Women live longer than men, so they are healthier. Wrong. They live longer than men, but they spend a much longer interval of their life in poor health. And that the women's health gap is concentrated at the end of life, and that is wrong. It was thought to be because that's where it is for men. But in fact, women's major health gap is between the ages of 20 and 50. And I'll show you some slides in a moment to emphasise that. Hopefully, you're going to agree that it's not just, women's health is not just about sexual and reproductive health. And then the one that used to get me really annoyed was when I asked funding bodies and pharma and industry why it is that they didn't invest in women. And they used to tell me, and they still do, that women's health is a niche market. And I just wonder what bit of 51% can ever be described as niche, but I'm not sure that I'm winning that battle. So the myth-busting reports, this is the one from McKinsey. They launched it in Davos in January 2024. It was a bit of a shock to everybody there. They said that if we closed the women's health gap across the globe, we could save $1 trillion, and that we really needed to focus on that. In the UK, these are the data that McKinsey very kindly analysed for me, and women spend about 19% more time in poor health, and you'll see the slide on the left. But the most important thing is on the right-hand side, where you see that the big health gap is actually in the earlier years, not in the women who are older. You're very welcome to use all these slides if you'd like to in the future. So there are 9 conditions which account for about a third of the women's health gap, and they're divided here into things that are health span conditions. So if you get these right, you add real life, quality of life to your years, and these are all the things that you would expect a gynaecologist to be talking about: endometriosis, menopause, migraine, premenstrual syndrome. But they're then the things that are the lifespan conditions. So if you target these, you're going to add years to life. And maternal hypertensive disorders, cervical cancer, breast cancer, ischemic heart disease, and postpartum hemorrhage. So there really is an awful lot we could be doing about this. And the other point that I wanted to make was that this starts, or needs to start, with the health of girls. And this is a slide that a colleague of mine from Harvard gave me, saying that in the Boston area, 84% of US teenagers missed or knew someone who missed class because they didn't have access to period products. This is the wealthiest country in the world. Endometriosis can take years to diagnose, and 30% is the average age of endometriosis diagnosis. But the thing that really horrifies me, and we must do something about it, is that only about 25% of paediatricians ask the girls who come to their clinic about their periods. It's just extraordinary, and it's not difficult. This is not rocket science. We could easily incorporate questions about menstrual health into every healthcare encounter. So we look at this slide and we see that actually on the far left, the 5% of this global health burden is the women-specific conditions, so the menopause stuff and all those other things that have got the headlines now. That there's another 4% of conditions that affect women differently, so cardiovascular disease and things like that. And then there's a large chunk that affect women disproportionately. So you don't know many men with autoimmune rheumatoid arthritis, do you, or thyroid disease? And I don't meet many men who have migraine either. And the other figure that I'm waiting to change, or think probably will change, is that 43% on the right-hand side, because they're conditions in which there's no current evidence that women are affected disproportionately or differently. But when you drill into the data, that's because no one's actually looked. And that's what we need to do next, I think. And I thought you'd be interested in this, because when I've said, oh, women have a much lower uptake of interventions when they go along to secondary care, but if you were to have a heart attack today, and I had a heart attack, or I had atrial fibrillation, let's say we both got that, and we went into casualty, you are 3 times more likely to be cardioverted than I am because of your gender or your sex. And women have a 28%, or men have a 28% higher likelihood of having their hip or their knee fixed when they go to, when they break it. I don't know whether that's because most interventional cardiologists and orthopaedic surgeons are male. I'm sure they don't do it deliberately, but there is a very definite bias about this at who gets treated. So the summation of this, and thanks to Lucy Perez at McKinsey, is that if in the UK, because I didn't reckon I could get our Chancellor to be interested in the whole world, if in the UK we could close that health gap, we would be saving 36 billion sterling every year. And as you see from this slide, it's not just about fewer health problems or fewer earlier deaths. The really big thing is the expanded participation. All those women between the ages of 20 and 60 who can get on with their lives, can go to employed or unpaid work, and get on with a better lifestyle. So I said things started to change. Well, we made some key collaborations and we had new political leadership. I think I also had a wake-up call because somebody else asked me if I'd write another report, and I decided I haven't got any more time to write reports. Got to stop admiring the problem, and we've got to really turn the ambition into action. So you'll see some photographs here of people you might recognise. Sam there at the bottom in the centre in her pink jacket. That was one of my first visits to the North East and North Cumbria, and a variety of other people there. Sue Mann is on the slide here. Just, oh yeah, I don't think I can point with that. On the bottom left-hand side, and she has been appointed at NHS England and really transformed the collaboration. It wasn't possible to collaborate really before, so that's an important thing. And then we've done a lot of collaborating with the voluntary sector, Lisa. And this is an example of something that's been incredibly successful with the charity I chair, Wellbeing of Women. So if you scan that QR code from my slide, you will go straight into the Wellbeing of Women website and to the period symptom checker. And you will be asked 10 or 12 questions about your periods. And at the end of it, you're then asked, would you like a printout to take to your healthcare professional? And if I tell you that this was launched just a year ago, and over 100,000 girls and women have downloaded these, and for once I haven't got into trouble with the GPs, because they say it's absolutely fantastic, because the woman walks in with a list of all the problems with her. Anyway, so because I used to get into a lot of trouble with trying to get things into the community. But anyway, the period symptom checker, I now want the charity to just change the title. Well, how about if we had a cardiovascular risk factor checker? It would be amazing what people could do and to understand what they could do to help themselves. And then, of course, we had this big change in July 2024, and the new broom came in. I mean, you all know the mantra. We got to shift care from hospital to community, from analogue to digital, to move from treatment to prevention. And, you know, that's exactly what the women's hubs, then the community hubs, and now we're going to call them the neighbourhood framework hubs are going to do. I just wanted to mention another wake-up call I had, which is in November 2024, 2.5 years ago. I was asked to look at the gynecology waiting list, and Sue Mann and I did it together. And we found that there were 600,000 women on the gynecology waiting list, and 85% of those women were not going to require an invasive procedure or an admission for an intervention or day surgery or inpatient care. So I think we have to ask ourselves, what the hell are they doing on a waiting list? Sometimes lasting on that waiting list or staying on that waiting list for nearly 2 years, while their endometriosis or their urinary incontinence problems get worse. It's just madness. So we've got to have this left shift, as you were saying earlier, Claire, but this isn't a little bit of a pushing it to the left. This needs to be a radical get up and move to the left. We've got to move away from this disease-based model into supporting community diagnostics and supporting our primary care colleagues and going out there and practicing what we preach so that we actually can get into the community and can really focus on prevention. I've never met anyone in healthcare who doesn't believe that prevention is better than cure, but we never actually get on and do it. And information, I think, particularly for women, and self-management is incredibly valuable. So that's the previous slide I showed you about what we could do in women's health on the left-hand side in that list. But as I've been, this is just some thoughts over the last couple of months when I've been to various places around the country, people who want to do vaccinations in these hubs, they want to give prenatal and postnatal advice, they want to do diabetic monitoring, they want to do blood pressure monitoring, renal dialysis. Why do people have to go to a hospital? The only thing you need from renal dialysis is a lot of water and some electricity and some beds. And you don't need to have to go into central London or central Newcastle and find parking. Weight loss services, fracture liaison services, mental health support. You mentioned the topic or the specialty and someone will say, I want to do something in the community there. So I'm just going to leave you with a thought that Atul Gawande, who I think is rather an extraordinary gentleman, has written this really good book called Better. And he says in his book, better is possible. It doesn't take genius, it takes diligence and clarity and it takes ingenuity. But most importantly, it takes a willingness to try to do things differently. And I think that's what we've got to persuade our colleagues, that the current model we've been using for 50, 60 years, and it doesn't work. And I think it was Einstein that said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So we've got to take this big jump and move to that left shift. So I think we have to implement the women's health strategy because, as I've said, I think when we get it better for women, we get it better for everyone, and we certainly get it better for less money. And to those ICB leads and finance officers who tell me we can't afford it because it's not been pump primed or we haven't got enough funding, my response is you can't afford to carry on wasting this money in this disease model approach. We've actually got to get better at this for the simple reason that we've got to close the women's health gap because women hold up half the sky. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leslie. That was wonderful. And we will now open it up for questions and comment and discussion. Who'd like to start? Tom. Tom Hall is a partner member from Public Health.
Thank you, Dame Leslie. I thought that was absolutely brilliant presentations. First time I've heard you speak was, and you laid it out so clearly. I wondered what your thoughts were about the interface around the women's health strategy and some of the wider policy reforms in education, particularly around family hubs and the child development requirements that are now placed on local areas as well. Just wondering where your thoughts were around that interface.
So I think that one of the big mistakes that we've made is, although we are virtually the only country in the world to have a national health service free at the point of delivery, we seem to think that the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS in England can cure the whole of health. And Michael Marmot taught me quite a long time ago, when he published his Fair Society Healthy Lives report, that you can only change a third of health by the healthcare I've been trained to deliver. And the other 2/3 are all the other aspects of life and the social determinants of disease. So this requires multi-government input and multi-sector input. If I had £1 for every time someone from the VCSE world says to me, I'd like to do something or I'd like to contribute this, I'd be a very, very wealthy woman, and I'm not. And I think it's so sad that what we do at the moment is put big doors and barriers up when people want to contribute something. So today, when I look at my emails on the way home, there will be people saying, I would like to contribute this, or my charity would like to donate something or other, or we would like to do... And they're all wanting to help. And we haven't got an open door that they, or a closed door even, that they can knock at and be guided through the pathway. So there will be all sorts of things we could do for VORG if we collaborated together. And when we stop fussing about who's getting the credit along the way, I've always found that if you stop fussing about that, or you tell everybody else it's all because they're so wonderful, that you can travel an awful lot farther and an awful lot faster. And I hope that although the violence against, I can assure you that violence against women and girls is very much a focus of the refresh of the strategy. But I remain worried about it because I think it's one of those problems that is so enormous, so ubiquitous, that everyone is frightened by it and thinks that they can't make a difference. And I think we've got to change the narrative and get every single person in this room to do one thing before next weekend that makes a contribution to it.
Neil O'Brien's the Chief Medical Officer.
Thanks. Great presentation, and I'm absolutely 100% supportive of all of the women's health initiatives out in the community. I think a lot more work can be done as illustrated. What I'm really trying, and what I'm fascinated about as a clinician, is your examples that you gave around hip surgery and AF cardioversion. And I'm just sat here thinking, when I've treated those conditions, it doesn't enter into my mind, are you a man or a woman? And therefore, I'm sat here thinking, do I have a complete unconscious bias in the way I'm treating people? And I just wonder if you had any insight into the why. Why are men 3 times more likely to get cardioverted when, if you look at it purely in a clinical scenario, gender doesn't come into your decision-making, or it shouldn't.
No, but I think you're right, Neil. I think there is a lot of unconscious bias, and I think it's not necessarily that they don't want to help women, but perhaps those male orthopaedic surgeons or male interventional cardiologists empathise more with a man in that position who might be the same age as them or have a similar background or whatever. I don't know. And but I do also think that women tend to put up with stuff. I was very, very struck. A couple of months, 6 months ago, I fractured my wrist very badly, and there was one time I had to go and get the splints rechanged. And I was sitting in casualty in Paddington, in London, and I was watching this woman who looked absolutely awful. And she was, then she fainted on the floor. And I said to the guy who was helping me with, well, what's the matter with her? And he said, oh, well, she's got terribly bad anemia, and we're going to have to transfuse her again. And the reality was that nobody had actually found out why she was anemic. She'd been to the gastroenterologist and she'd been to all sorts of other people, but nobody asked her about her periods. And I mean, it may sound a very silly thing, and of course I picked up on that and managed to get her in and sort it out. But the reality, I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, the expense of 3 or 4 casualty presentations and a couple of blood transfusions in the space of a couple of weeks, it's phenomenal.
Thank you.
And she'd had every gastrointestinal investigation in the book, but nobody had thought that to ask her about her periods.
Jacqueline Myers, Chief Strategy Officer.
Hi Leslie, thanks for a great presentation. I want to ask you a little bit more about contraception, and I was really struck by your point about deteriorating access. And I just wondered if you had further thoughts about why it's so difficult and whether there was anywhere in the country that was getting it right.
Well, good question. The North West have done it very well. They started with dual or co-commissioning, so you could use it for, instead of me telling you, no, I can't give you a LARC for your progestogen, protection of your endometrium when you go on to estrogen HRT, which is such a lifesaver for so many, and there's the case that Claire was saying, I hope you're giving this woman a LARC as well, I'll put a Myrena in. Instead of doing that, I meant to be saying, well, no, I can't give that to you for here because we're not commissioned for that. You have to go to the menstrual health or the menstrual management clinic. And if you happen to say, well, actually, I'd like a Myrena coil for contraception, I meant to say, no, you can't have that because we're not commissioned. So it's very much about unpicking this commissioning. And by the way, whilst I got the speculum in, it's not the most comfortable situation to be in, is it? And I'm putting this Myrena coil in. I'm not meant to do your smear. And when you tell me that you've got a lump in the breast and the mammography room is 2 doors down, I'm not meant to send you for a mammogram. So we've just got to stop this, it's just ridiculous. We have to think about how we wrap the services around women, and it will save an absolute fortune just in administrative costs, if nothing else.
David Chandler, who's our Chief Finance Officer.
Are you very frightened by what I'm saying?
Afternoon, Dame Leslie. No, quite the contrary. So, yes, I'm the Chief Finance Officer, the type person you refer to. First of all, I just want to say what a great presentation. I wasn't sitting here thinking to myself, as much as I love a business case, as much as I love a prioritisation process, in terms of where do we allocate funding, I was sitting there thinking, wow, that's a pretty good business case I've just seen there. And I wasn't sitting here thinking, oh, we can't afford to do that. I was sitting here thinking, how do we allocate the left shift funding that we've got over the next few years? And I'd be amazed if this didn't tick lots of boxes in that respect. So we're not doing a disservice to other things we need to do. I could imagine the lady sitting to my left will be knocking on my door very soon and saying, see, and how do we ensure that that gets a fair crack in the finances? And I was sitting here thinking, we've got great pilots that don't cost a lot of money, to be fair, in Sunderland and in Gateshead. And wouldn't it be great if we had those more widely across the patch? So just to give you some reassurances that the CFO in the room was thinking along those lines. I'm not sure every CFO would necessarily be thinking that.
Exactly, but that's why I keep visiting the North East and North Cumbria, because they seem to be quite imaginative up here.
Fantastic.
But I think the other thing to mention there as well is that most of the things that I've been talking about in the reproductive and menstrual health field are maintenance therapy. These are not diseases usually. So what I would like to do is to get all that maintenance health and women sorted out very easily, and self-referring. I mean, why do you need to go to a doctor to be told that you need to, you've got painful heavy periods and you need some treatment for it? You don't need to. And then we could plough all of that wasted resource into the cardiovascular, the osteoporosis and frailty and the dementia stuff, and the cancer development as well. So I'm not planning to live forever, and most ministers I say that to look enormously relieved, but I do want to live as well as I can for as long as I can, and I want to postpone the disability and the dependence that those 4 disorders I just mentioned impose, particularly on women, because they do spend a much longer interval of their lives disabled or becoming distant from the rest of their world. So it's really a question of trying to make, I see this as the housekeeping stuff, all that reproduction stuff, and then we can actually put the resources into quality of life. For my daughters, the young women in your life too, who are going to live for longer post-reproductive than they were reproductive.
Lisa.
Thank you for that presentation. I wanted to go back to the bit where you talked about working in partnership, particularly with the voluntary sector, and we've got a really good foundation to build on in our ICB, as you know. But have you got any hints and tips for effective working between health and the voluntary sector that we might not have developed? Obviously, the best at getting better is something that we really want to do.
Well, just a few days ago, there was this call launched for partnership bids. Have you seen that? From the DH. I can ping you the link. It's quite a short turnaround, of course. I think it's something like April the 22nd is the bid, but it's basically put forward your proposal for partnership working. They're not going to give you shed loads of money. In fact, I don't think they're going to give you any. But what they're going to say is that we're going to smooth that pathway, you know, go create that open door that used to be closed and locked tight to help you move into it. So I think that hopefully that is going to be a start. There's an enormous amount that could be done. And as I say, you know, some of the charitable sector have done the most marvellous things. And as I keep saying to my colleagues at the DH, no, we don't ask NHS Digital to go and put information about blah, blah, blah in women's health. It's all out there. We don't need to write it all again. You know, there are about 17 pharma companies will write about menopause or you know, pain relief for periods or whatever. We don't need that. It's already there. And I think that everyone is so very generous with their contributions if you ask them for it. And all we need to do is acknowledge them. You know, when the period symptom checker, I got it through, it's going to go onto the NHS app. All we're going to say at the end of it is, you know, thanks to Wellbeing of Women for funding this. And I think there'll be so much scope for that. I'll give you the link when we finish the meeting.
Sarah Malik, the GP partner member.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dame Leslie. That was such a fantastic and inspirational presentation. I just wanted to touch upon some of the things that you said about the barriers that we have as a health system and as patients in the system as well. But I'd like to hear your insights into what you spoke about vulnerable women cohorts, particularly our Black and ethnic minority ladies and the increased maternal mortality risks as you described. Is there any other insights you could share with us regarding those vulnerable cohorts that we as a board and as a health system looking at women's health transformation that we could use to guide our principles?
Thank you. Well, it wasn't until I visited the Southwest ICB that I realised quite what a problematic area they've got. I mean, so they've got very, very high instance of domestic violence and also drug users. And, you know, you think about Cornwall and Devon as being those pretty places on postcards, but actually life there is very, very tough. They've set up models, pop-up models, by which I mean, or rotating models, whereby a van that's kitted out with a mammography, colposcope, various other things, a bed and various sort of facilities, blood pressure monitoring, you know, cholesterol checks, things like that, goes round. And although they have got a very large population, and this is what I hadn't appreciated, in the Southwest, which is an enormous geographical footprint, they've got a very large population of itinerant people, Roma, gypsies, and drug abusers, and well, I should say survivors of violence. And these are often not advertised in paper form or on an internet or whatever, but it's passed by word of mouth. They are always swamped. And they've done the same thing in Manchester. There's a bus in Manchester that goes round the stations and looks after the drug addicts, the alcoholics, and the sex workers. And they always know when the bus is coming. And it has made a real, real difference. And what I saw this morning in the Gateshead hub was women who have never, ever had care before, who, for the first time, I think, in their lives, feel valued. And it's really very, very impressive to see. You should be very proud of that hub, because they had the most amazing things. There was one woman telling me that how she'd decided she was going to come in today because her mate was coming in and her mate had persuaded her to come, and that something else had happened. And then she said, I'm going to pluck up the courage now to tell them about this lump I've got in my breast. But they feel valued, and it's not difficult to be humane about things. But we just have to persuade enough people that it really, really pays off. But it was very humbling to see all those women, and the place was a hubbub. You know, it was, you know, couldn't get a word in edgeways. Everyone was chattering away, and sharing anecdotes about this, that, and the other. And have you seen this? And this food bank's just opened up, and it was really, really inspiring.
Sam Allen, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Dame Leslie. Thank you for your presentation and for visiting us. It's been really fantastic, and I'm sure our colleagues out in the services would have really enjoyed being able to share their work with you. When we first started our journey on women's health as an ICB, one of the things that was sort of new to me that really struck me was the gap in training for health professionals. And even if I was just looking at general practitioners, the struggle that they had to get on access to approved training. Because I think you're absolutely right. If we can make every contact count, but I suppose it's people having the skills and the confidence to do the training. I just wondered if there's anything on the horizon around changes to training, or if there's something you think we could do that would make a real difference.
Yes. So on several counts, I think. I've been to the GMC, and Charlie Massey has promised me that this new credentialing is going to include fundamental, sort of core services for women's services, understanding about menstrual health, into undergraduate training. The sadness is when I came out of medical school, all GPs, or all promising GPs, had to do 6 months of obs and gynae. And, you know, many of them don't now. About 50% of them don't do any obstetrics or gynecology. So they don't know about early pregnancy, miscarriage, the commonest complication of pregnancy, and they don't know anything about contraception or menopause. So we do have to change that. And I think the way that we've trained people, when I told Gillian Merron, who's the minister in the Lords, who's got all the women's health briefs, when I explained to her that one of the problems was that the GP or the midwife or the gynecology specialist nurse has to pay to go on a training course to fit LARC or do pessaries and things like that, and then they have to pay for an annual certificate of competence. She said, what? You mean we're charging people to do this? So one of the things that we've been cooking up is actually getting pharma to actually contribute to an education fund, which would allow us to then train healthcare staff, whatever their backgrounds were, in all sorts of various techniques and skills. And I'm sure it's the way forward. And I'm, you know, as I was jesting a bit when I said to Liam that he, you know, if he came along to a coil fitting clinic, he'd be expert by lunchtime. But you know, it is a really good way of training people, and then you only need to do perhaps one session every couple of years to get recertified. But to be charging people, some of them on very low salaries, a fee to look after patients better, and 51% of the population better, I think is madness. We've just got to change it. And this is not a large sum of money that's involved. This is about training, you know, and you can do much of it online and with modules, and then just do some, with models, you know, with dummy models, and then you can just do a few, you know, real cases, so to speak. It's very, very easy to sort out, but we've got to stop the way that people have always been doing things and say, no, that doesn't work. We're going to do it much better.
Michelle Evans, Workforce Director.
Thank you. And that presentation was fantastic, and it's really got my mind thinking about the NHS workforce that we've got, as you said, in terms of it's 80% women.
Yeah.
In the North East, we are the largest employer. We are doing a lot as a system to look at women's health, and we are looking at how we can support people, for example, through menopause and the fertility policies that we've established. But looking at the presentation that you've given, it's really made me think about that life cycle of women. We have got women that join the NHS very young, and everybody's working longer now, so they are going to be with us for a lot longer, larger piece of time. So I'd just like to thank you. It's really got me thinking about how I can go back into our group of CPOs and to actually think about what can we do as a system, not just to look at a specific thing of the mental health linked to menopause, but that treatment side of things. And we've already working with the Health and Growth Accelerator through Claire and looking at the funding. So I'd hopefully like to share this presentation with my colleagues.
You're very welcome
to the discussion of how we can help the NHS staff.
And I would add too, you know, if you're a big trust or you're a big group of trusts, you know, open a women's health hub. I mean, you will be able to get your female employees go for one visit, and they can do all those things, not 5 days off work or 5 sessions off, or actually putting up with things that they don't need to put up with. I mean, it's just a no-brainer, I feel. because retaining staff is the biggest problem we've got, isn't it? You know, you can recruit them and then we lose them because quite frankly, we don't treat them well.
Final question from me. One of the downsides of being a chair of a board, you have to wait till the end to ask you a question. Oh, many questions anyway.
Is it going to be a killer?
Just, it's really about adoption, how to get widespread adoption. And one of the things I found as Chief Medical Officer over 12 years is that new ideas, particularly services, don't travel well from national to local level, because on the way, the original vision, the paradigm, the kind of inspiration, the way of thinking that you want people to use when they're in the service, all of those get degraded as they descend. And you're doing a Herculean job in trying to get this implemented and embedded. But it seems to me that you need some help with the way the NHS disseminates these things. And my first thought is people in Sam's network, all of the ICB chief executives, we need more people to take ownership of this. So it just doesn't happen in the places where there are the enthusiasts, but it happens everywhere. So I think that's, I know in my view, that's the next big challenge, the challenge of implementation in the right way and adoption of the vision that you've created. So anyway, that's just my thought.
Yeah, and I don't like to use the economic argument all the time, because I think there should be a moral argument for why we should be looking after girls and women well. But I'm a realist and I'm a housekeeper. So I believe that, you know, if the economic argument wins the game, well, then we've got to get very, very good at playing it. And I think your Chief Finance Officer is convinced he's going to be doing some scaling up on the figures here. And I think it's down to leadership, as you've just said, isn't it? It's the leaders like Claire and Sam who have taken this on board, and despite a really, really difficult backdrop over the last year, have created something that I saw today and was really, really impressive. And yeah, we have to get more and more people to realise that they can't afford not to do it the right way. And lastly, I would say, I think a great friend of mine who sadly died recently always used to say, you know, you've got to make the best way the easy way, or the right way the easy way. And we've got to make it very easy for ICBs and local authorities to actually do the right thing.
Okay, well, I think we've now taken all the questions and comments. There have been a lot of them, and that's no great surprise. But it's been wonderful to listen to you today, Leslie. You've really given us a strategic masterclass in how to take your passion and your appropriately orientated view of how women should receive healthcare forward. And Claire, I'm not surprised that Claire didn't get too many questions, because we were here to think about some of the things, not just at our own level, but at the level you've been working at. So thank you. We're immensely grateful to you.
No, thank you.
We look forward to, hopefully, with future contact in the next few months as we move the services that Claire's been talking about forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you.
So we finished the meeting. There's no other business. There are no other questions from the public. We dealt with all of them earlier on. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll go offline now.